Dear friends, Queen Elizabeth I was hailed as the Virgin Queen, the Great Queen, and the glory of England. Yet there's one thing few dare to mention. Within minutes of her appearing, the very scent of the room would transform. Some described it as a foul stench, while others saw it as a symbol of power. Tonight we shall overturn this splendid court and uncover the true scent of power. Before you relax, if you truly enjoy my content, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Now dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan. Let its gentle hum become your background sound. Let us embark together on tonight's journey. Dear friends, close your eyes. Let us pierce the veil of time and return to that world aglow with gold, a sanctuary built of power, poetry, and prayer. But for now, do not gaze upon the stained glass. Do not look at the gilded dome. First, take a deep breath. Do you smell it? It is not the dust of history you might imagine. It is roses, musk, burning amber, Spanish leather steeped in perfume, bundles of dried herbs hung between beams. But take one more deep breath. Let the air linger in your lungs. Feel the deeper, more hidden foundation. The faint intoxication of aged woolen fabric saturated with dampness. The tarred residue from animal-fat candles burning day and night. The warm, salty evidence of countless bodies quietly secreting beneath heavy garments. Welcome to the court of Queen Elizabeth I. Welcome to Whitehall, the beating heart of England, and Europe's most notoriously foul-smelling royal residence. From the outside, it was a dreamlike palace. Majestic stone structures, endless corridors, soaring window frames bathed in pale daylight. Banners fluttered, music played. Noble women glided elegantly in gowns worth more than a farmer's lifetime earnings. It possessed every element required for a Renaissance drama, except there was no air circulation. For once inside, the illusion of splendor crumbled with every breath. The walls might be gilded, the floors polished to a mirror, but the air, it was no friendly ally. People tucked herbs into their sleeves and hung spice-filled oranges from their belts. This was not merely for festive ambience. They were guarding their nostrils, waging a silent battle for survival. Elizabeth herself knew this struggle intimately. She spared no effort to emit any fragrance other than the scent of the human body. Her bedchamber was piled high with incense bowls and perfumed gloves. Her gowns were lined with crushed dried flowers and exotic spices. When she moved through the court, she did not walk alone. She seemed to float within a carefully cultivated, richly scented mist. Its persistence likely outlasted the tenure of most courtiers. Truthfully, she needed these masks, for the palace reeked not only of human sweat. It was saturated with the sticky residue of bustling life. Imagine velvet soaked through with perspiration. Picture thick furs, unwashed for a decade. Envision the smoke from animal-fat candles seeping into tapestries, lingering for months. Now weave all these scents together. But do not blame her or them. This was the norm of that era. 16th century people did not bathe daily, not even weekly. If someone bathed monthly, it seemed like they were flaunting it. Water sources were not trusted. Doctors solemnly warned bathing opens pores, inviting disease. So they chose concealment. Perfume sprayed, powder dusted, fragrant handkerchiefs dabbed at foreheads. The logic was simple: if it smells sweet, it must be clean, right? Wrong. Picture wearing 5 layers of clothing all day, crammed into crowded halls, dancing, sweating, eating heavily spiced meats. Then picture hanging that same gown in the wardrobe. Tomorrow, the day after, and the day after that, wearing it again. No washing, just brushing off the dust, airing it by the window. Perhaps stuffing lavender into the cuffs might mask the odor. But soapy water? Absolutely not. That was the privilege of commoners or corpses. Thus, in the corridors of Whitehall, what you smelled wasn't merely the scent of others. It was their frailty, their meals, their moods, even their stress. Cows bore stories, but they were chapters you'd never want to read up close. Candles too. Cheap tallow candles, burning day and night. Melted wax dripping down the wick, falling greasy lumps. The scent combines the pungent smell of livestock pens with the greasy fumes of kitchens. And there's something else indescribable, a vibrant sense of decay. It clings to you, whispering in your ear, this is royal life. Even the fragrant air of Elizabeth's bedchamber cannot fully mask this scent. Velvet absorbs everything. Down-filled mattresses absorbed the air, then slowly exhaled it. Her presence perhaps masked the worst of it. But anyone who stepped within her curtains knew the truth. The court, viewed from afar, shone with dazzling splendor. Up close, it was an entirely different spectacle. Yet no one complained. Even if grievances existed, they were voiced with utmost caution. If you dare say the Queen's court reeks of a butcher's shop in the sweltering summer, you stand no chance of reaching the heart of power. Ambassadors might hint at it a letter's home. Yet face to face, they bow deeply in respect. They smile, inhaling the scent into their perfume-drenched sleeves. The point is, scent is politics. Fragrance signifies who holds power, who may enter the court, who can afford roses shipped from distant seas, who must endure stale rosemary. An elegant body scent is never a personal preference. It is proof of identity, armor for survival in the world. Elizabeth understood this better than anyone. Her fragrance was never accidental. It was meticulously orchestrated, strictly controlled. Her fragrance always preceded her arrival in the hall. Yet even the most precious perfume has its limits. Beneath layers of silk, saffron, and musk, truth still lurked. This palace, however splendid, ultimately suffused with an inescapable human scent. Gowns well ordered, yet never truly cleansed. Bodies anointed with balm, yet seldom bathed. People forced smiles while inwardly speculating on the source of this complex scent. Today, when we imagine royalty, our minds conjure elegant lines, pristine linens, snow-white gloves. But royal life then meant sweat stains beneath pearls, grease marks upon velvet. It meant spraying cinnamon oil on stains and pretending nothing had happened. Everyone played along, unspoken, because no one wanted to be the one to admit the emperor, or rather, the Queen, might smell a bit off. Yes, Whitehall was indeed a palace. It possessed true grandeur, power, and history. But it was also where hundreds lived crammed between heavy fabrics. No plumbing system, no ventilation, and certainly no soap. The truth wasn't hidden in the shadows. It hung suspended in the air. One deep breath was enough to detect it. Right now, as you rest your head on a soft pillow, perhaps wrapped in freshly laundered sheets, consider giving thanks. Be thankful for hot water, for clean sheets, for laundry detergent. Perhaps, just perhaps, be thankful you were not a noble from the 16th century, not forced to wear ceremonial robes untouched since Easter, not dancing at summer banquets. For however glorious the past may seem, it was not always fragrant with roses. In Queen Elizabeth's world, natural scents had vanished. If anyone imagined the lingering fragrance of roses or citrus drifting from her presence, let it be clear it did not come from her skin. It was layers upon layers of musk and civet oil, applied and sprinkled with battlefield-linest tactical precision. The Queen did not trust plain water. She trusted perfume. Wearing fragrance was not for others' pleasure. It was for survival. She did not merely use perfume, she made it her talisman. Before each public appearance, her attendants assisted her in meticulous preparation. The process was deliberate and slow. First, thick base oils were applied to her wrists and behind her ears. Then, pouches filled with cloves, cinnamon, lavender, and rosemary were sewn into her sleeves. Finally, a mist of precious fragrances, crushed resins, ambergris was the final chapter, to shield the scent between her body and the nostrils of her courtiers. This was not a pursuit of beauty. It was crisis management. When you go days without bathing, clad in 5 layers of unwashed fabric, your body will eventually tell the story you'd rather keep sealed. Elizabeth would never allow a shred of truth to escape beneath her velvet robes. As queen, she was both a symbol and a myth in the making. Yet the scent beneath her arms could swiftly destroy that myth. The court knew this well. Of course, everyone has body odor. The key lay in how it was concealed. The scent of sweat and stale wool signified poverty, or worse, a forgotten fate. Yet when foul odors mingled with expensive perfumes and imported powders, they instantly transcended into courtly elegance, even aristocratic grace. Elizabeth, however, pushed this art to its extreme. She did not merely mask her scent, she weaponized it. Legend has it that after she departed, her scent lingered in the halls for hours. One ambassador described her presence as heavy as air. Another mentioned needing to air out the room for hours after she left. Of course, no one dared speak plainly, unless they wished to be exiled to Ireland, but everyone understood. They simply chose to describe it in courtly euphemisms. She reigned fragrant ly euphemism hinting at the pungent martyred minus spice aroma that enveloped her. Yet one must admit, she truly mastered this art. In a court reeking of carnal stench, she made her distinctive scent seem noble and extraordinary. She understood perfume not merely as a cover for body odor, but as a weapon of power. The scent of a peasant might make one wrinkle their nose, but the fragrance of a queen commanded reverence. Unfair, perhaps, but profoundly effective. Her perfumes were anything but cheap. Musk was scraped from deer glands. Civet came from the hindquarters of wild cats. Ambergris formed from whale vomit fermenting in the sea. These ingredients were rare, foul minus smelling, and exorbitant Christ. Perfect for a monarch. She sought not freshness, but the scent of wealth. In this she succeeded. Yet even the strongest fragrance has its limits. In the heat of summer, layer upon layer of powdered perfume began to melt. The skin's true scent began to show through. Her wig, saturated with powder, carried not just fragrance like everything else. Perfume now bore more than scent. Her never-minus washed gowns soaked up pressure illness, and the residue of endless council meetings. Perfume couldn't erase these, it nearly blended with them. Ultimately, it formed a unique scent, one impossible to bottle. It held the ethereal quality of myth, the raw reality of flesh, and the weight of the Middle Ages. The queen's scent was her very self. The closer you drew, the clearer its meaning became. Yet no one spoke of it. They bowed, smiled, kissed gloves, and discussed the weather, never mentioning how, long after the meeting ended, the sensation of her presence lingered on their skin. That would have been too rude. No one wished to shatter the illusion. So the courtiers followed suit. If the queen exuded a blend of musk, citrus, and whale spittle, then by God, so must they. Men anointed their ears with perfumed oils, women stuffed turbs into their corsts. The air thickened with perfume, causing some visitors to complain of headaches, nausea, even fainting. Yet they forced smiles. For in the 16th century, fainting from perfume was proof of having been in the presence of greatness. This was no accident. Elizabeth understood better than anyone the scent was not merely personal, it was political. Freshness signified control, richness symbolized power. A strong scent declared presence. To smell someone before seeing them was to enter their sphere of influence. She ensured her scent arrived before her body, a mastery of precision worthy of admiration. Even by modern standards, her methods were nauseating. For we must not forget what perfume concealed. No bathing, no deodorant, let alone oral hygiene. Only fabric, powder, sweat, and desperation. Scrape beneath her gloves, and the residue might reveal half a year's court history. Perhaps that's why her scent is so unforgettable. It's not just perfume, but a biography. It tells the story of a woman forced to become a legend, weaving legend again and again with sackets. But whether legend or not, the truth will seep through. To see the whole picture, you must pierce the perfume. Through rosemary minus stuffed sleeves, past powdered wigs. Look deep into the wardrobe. Because the true story, the one that cannot be concealed, hangs in plain sight. Within reach. In the palace's dim corners, soft light flows. Heavy draperies swallow sound. Gowns hang silently. Some embroidery is so intricate it seems stitched with hair. Some gold thread perfectly captures the shifting candlelight. But if you draw near not to admire, but to inhale, truth reveals itself. These gowns do not smell of lavender. Not at all. They carry the scent of something trying to mimic lavender, like garments that have seen too many bodies, yet seldom touched by clean water. Court attire is never laundered, only meticulously preserved and carefully maintained. Ampered even but never scrubbed or soaked. To submerge precious velvet in water is unthinkable. It would shrink, warp, fade, bleed, completely lose its form. These garments were never meant to be washed. They exist only to be brushed. Thus, whenever the queen sat at her dressing table or stood before her mirror each morning, someone stood by with a stiff bristled brush, gently tracing the folds of yesterday's gown. They would turn garments inside out, lightly pat them, and smooth the seams. Then shake off the dust by the window. Sometimes they would hang the clothes on a rack beside the hearth, letting the warmth dispel any dampness. But water, no. Water was for commoners and drain. Instead, fragrances. They tuck bundles of dried herbs into the linings, mostly rosemary, lavender, occasionally mixed with orange peel or cinnamon bark. The sackets are sewn into cuffs, corsets, or hidden within the folds of petticoats. Up close, the scent isn't overpowering, yet it creates an illusion. From a few paces away, you might believe the queen herself exuded sweetness. To see that this sweetness was merely an illusion, one had to draw an era. What she changed more frequently were her undergarments, linen, petticoats, stockings, and the fabrics that touched her skin directly. These garments were washed whenever possible. Though soap was not used, repeated washing and wringing provided a semblance of cleanliness. Yet by evening, these garments still carried the true scent of the body they concealed. By the weekend, outer garments were saturated with body odor. Gloves were a category unto themselves, made of soft leather, sometimes lined with silk. They were often embroidered with intricate patterns. But more importantly, they were saturated with fragrance, rose oil, violet, bergamot. Occasionally, strong spices like camphor or cloves were added. The queen wore them almost constantly. She curtsied with them, received subjects with them. Nobles were permitted to greet her by kissing the gloves. This was both traditional ritual and social performance. It also served hygiene purposes. After all, kissing a perfume-soaked leather glove was far more decorous than touching a hand untouched by soap for weeks. These gloves were rarely washed, replaced only when worn beyond use. If the leather stiffened, it was softened by rubbing with perfumed balm. Some gloves retained such potent fragrance that their scent lingered even after the stitching had disintegrated. Yet even so, gloves carried far more than scent. They bore traces of meals, imprints of handshakes, and the marks of long days gripping the throne's armrests. And within the folds of her skirts, history was creased. Some say these garments are more truthful than portraits. The queen in the painting may stand still as a statue, untouched by time or sweat. But the gowns hanging in the dim wardrobe tell a different story. They whisper of the anxious sweat during negotiations, of the sickness hidden beneath a painted smile, and of the long hours spent standing stiff-legged. And these splendid fabrics seldom stand alone. Lace, ribbons, velvet, and fur, eternal companions. All absorb scents, not just perfume, but body odor, skin oils, the faint soreness of stress, summer warmth, winter dampness. Everything is locked within the weave. Since the gowns weren't ever laundered, those scents never truly dissipated. They merely blended with the perfume sprayed the next day, layer upon layer, until the gowns no longer carried the scent of roses or musk. Only the full fragrance of Elizabeth remained. The attendants learned to refrain from comment. They scrubbed and dusted, turned the fabrics, and hung them to dry with care, always pretending these garments remained fresh. They worked in silence, hands gliding over seams untouched by water for months. They knew which gowns carried a heavier scent, which had been worn through illness, which weathered storms. They knew full well, yet kept their lips sealed. To her credit, the queen never pretended these gowns were pristine. Yet she always maintained a dignified facade. In her world, appearances were everything. Cleanliness had nothing to do with soap, but with the illusion of control. Meticulously combed robes symbolized stability. Fragrant hems signaled power. Gloved hands maintained distance. She wore these garments like shields. Those around her understood implicitly. The entire court followed this code. Nobles hung garments by the windows, beating them with paddles. They dusted them with powder, then wiped them with cloths soaked in vinegar and herbs. But they never truly washed them. That was too dangerous. Better to carry the scent of rosemary and aged wool. They would never risk ruining a double's worth, more than a year's rent. Thus the court scent grew complex. Not foul, at least not overtly so, yet hardly fresh either. It was a blend of aged fabrics, new perfumes, stale sweat, and tar. Deliberate, perfunctory masking. It clung to your skin, your hair, the tip of your tongue. When you left the court, you always carried fragments of it with you. The queen's gowns, gloves, collars, even her shoes. These items never touched water, only brushing, powdering, and layer upon layer of concealment. In a sense, Queen Elizabeth's court was just like that. Everything was masked, rarely truly clean. People entered in dazzling splendor, yet departed in utter silence. Light enough that no one mentioned the scent, but if you drew near her, close enough to see the exquisite stitching on her cuffs, close enough to smell the warmth rising from the fabric, you would understand. You would feel it, smell it, comprehend it. Royal bloodline did not necessarily mean purity. Sometimes it only meant no one dared speak of the filth. Yet the worst part wasn't the garments. The true horror lay beneath them. The skin, the sores, the sweat soaked into the linen that couldn't be ignored. Even when perfumed ointments covered her body, when dressing and grooming never ceased, when lavender sachets drifted everywhere, Elizabeth could never escape one thing: her own body. In Elizabeth's court, people never truly bathed. To immerse oneself in a tub, to let clear water caress the skin from head to toe. This was not merely rare, it was deemed dangerous. For those clad in lace ruffs and heavy hair bands, this danger was held as gospel. They claimed open pores draw in foul air, allowing disease to slip through the skin. So they substituted fragrance for cleansing, concealment for washing. For them cleanliness was performance, not practice. The Queen herself was no exception. She bathed rarely, perhaps once a month, or less. When she did bathe, it was in private, surrounded by trusted maids. The room was preheated, curtains drawn tight, herbal waters prepared. Yet even then, it resembled ritual more than cleansing. Cloths weren't ever scrubbed, warm water never cooled. The air perpetually carried the scent of roses, steam, and candle smoke. This was not about removing grime, but recreating the illusion of freshness. Daily cleansing followed a different ritual. An incense-scented basin stood perpetually on a low table. A damp cloth, wrung dry, lightly brushed her cheeks and palms. Occasionally it swept across her chest, but never touched her legs or feet. Those were too intimate. The risk was too high. Vinegar-soaked linen squares, lightly dabbed along the neck, temples, wrists, leaving a pungent, lingering scent. Not truly clean, yet not entirely unpleasant. The goal was not cleanliness, but to emit the scent of someone who never needed cleaning. Wooden or tin-lined bathtubs did exist, but were rarely used routinely. Most remain idle in storage, reserved for special occasions or severe illness. Only when body odor becomes offensive or sickness demands it do servants prepare a bath. Even then, it is no cause for celebration. Stepping into the tub feels like entering a doctor's office. One treads cautiously, heart filled with doubt, hoping only to emerge no worse than when entering. Herbal pouches served as common substitutes. Cloth bags stuffed with dried flowers, mint, rosemary, sometimes mixed with burnt orange peel. Soaked in warm water, they were pressed against the body. The water turned murky, its scent pungent. The touch is warm and soothing. Yet the skin remains greasy, still dusty, still bearing yesterday's accumulated grime. In earlier times, this system might sound absurd, but to them, it made perfect sense. Those around Elizabeth did not believe dirt was the root of the problem. They were convinced it was the smell. If it didn't reek, it wasn't dirty. If you smelled of flowers, you were clean. Even if you only wiped your body 3 times a week with linen cloths soaked in rosewater. The scene was almost comical. Imagine nobles waving sachets while their skin cracked beneath layers of powder. But this wasn't laziness, it was logic forged by fear. Fear of plague, dread of invisible ailments, a wariness of damp and touching air that could be deadly. Rather than risk it, they chose powder, incense, and dryness. Elizabeth had her own methods. She loved pressing a commander's lapel to her cheek. When someone drew near, she would inhale softly. This seemed elegant, but it was defense. She knew the body odors of her courtiers. Never would she allow that stench to breed in her lungs. Behind her fan, her gloves, her silk, there was always a barrier. Scent was not merely fragrance, but armor. In the height of summer, it was worse. Heat waves pressed down upon the palace. Layers of clothing clung to skin. Linen hugged the body. Hair matted into clumps. Wigs exuded a sour stench. The air thickened with sweat, perfume, and tallow smoke. It grew oppressive. Yet no one reached for soap. No one prepared her bath. Instead came more powder, more spices, more concealment. Sometimes a scent preceded her, even before the queen appeared. Roses, musk, and deeper fragrances wove into a rich floral bouquet, drifting through corridors, around corners, into rooms. This scent heralded her arrival, and signaled her struggle. She sought to rise above the court's filth, to maintain royal dignity in a world that refused purity. The servants knew this well. They always had. They laundered garments, replaced dishes, perfumed gloves. Yet they never spoke, for the system functioned flawlessly. No one spoke of filth. As long as the scent was expensive, filth ceased to exist. Elizabeth, with all her power, lived within the rules. Her body was sacred and inviolable, above discomfort. But this body was still flesh and blood. It sweated, it ached, it creaked beneath the corset. Even as she stood like a statue, deep within the body kept telling the truth. Yet no one spoke. But when candlelight just grazed her gown, when fragrance lingered on her face instead of drifting away, the illusion trembled slightly, just enough to plant a seed of doubt, yet sufficient to make it clear. For beneath all the perfumes, powders, and rituals, something else lingers. A trace no herb can ever fully erase. To glimpse the price they paid to conceal the truth, look only at the transformation of her face. Once, when people gazed upon Elizabeth's countenance, they saw only flawless perfection, moonlight minus pale, porcelain minus smooth, unreachable in every dimension. From afar, it was no longer skin, but a mask. Yet this was precisely what she saw. She did not strive to reveal humanity, but to present an eternal visage, uncorked by illness, unshaken by time. For this, she needed far more than mere makeup. Rituals and copious amounts of poison were required. Each morning, before the palace awoke, when kitchen smoke still lingered in the corridors, Elizabeth would sit quietly, beginning her ritual. Her maids knew the process well: garments laid out, pigments prepared, oil bottles uncorked. The first step was applying a thick layer of white lead powder, a base makeup blended from white lead and vinegar. She spread it gently with a soft cloth or sponge, layer upon layer. The texture was heavy yet smooth, carrying a weighty presence, like applying plaster to warm skin. The lead powder imparted an unnatural, luminous whiteness to her complexion. At that time, pallid skin was a symbol of noble status. It signified a life spent indoors, free from the toil of laboring under the scorching sun like commoners. Thus, Elizabeth applied the pigment to every inch of her face and neck, sometimes even extending it to her hands. This layer of sail makeup created a flawless, blank canvas, at least on the surface. Next came the shimmer powder, crushed pearls ground into a fine dust, lightly dusted upon cheeks and forehead. By candlelight, the glow shimmered faintly, not a healthy radiance, not something radiating from within, but a reflected, artificial light. This beauty was most captivating from across the room. Up close, it lost its luster. She added color with vermilion. This deep red pigment was made from mercury sulfide. She mixed vermilion with oil, dotting it lightly on her cheeks, just enough to hint at a warm pulse, a suggestion of youth long gone. On certain days, her lips would also take on a flush, not every time, but when resolve needed to be shown, this touch of red served its purpose. These pigments were all toxic. Leadened mercury components corroded her skin over time, causing rashes, eroding soft tissue. Yet there was no turning back. The deeper the damage from the makeup, the more dependent she became. It became a vicious cycle. Concealed damage caused new damage. Conceal again. The attendants gradually noticed something amiss. They remained silent, of course. Yet they saw the red patches on her face, the cracks at her nostrils. Each morning a thicker layer of foundation was needed to rebuild her appearance. One diplomat wrote that her features seemed to dissolve gradually at dusk. Another noted the stark difference in her appearance when she turned her head. The illusion held only when viewed from the front. Yet she persisted, for she had to. A queen could not show weakness, whether in public or private. Even as her body ached and her teeth decayed, her face must maintain its frozen pallor and luster. It was her shield, her emblem. Perhaps in the darkest corners of her soul, also her prison. She rarely touched her own face, neither in public nor in private, not even to adjust a curl. This task was performed by her maids in silence, wiping, combing, powdering. They learned to keep their hands steady, their voices soft. They witnessed the deepening wrinkles year after year, the increasingly gaunt contours of her jawline. Yet they remained silent. Their duty was not to expose the queen, but to sustain her. By the time she stepped into the public eye, the transformation was complete. Her skin appeared flawless, cheeks flushed with color, eyes sparkling. Yet beneath all the makeup lay a certain fragility, a certain actances. Each night, as the colors were wiped away inch by inch, the truth re-emerged, cracked and broken. As Elizabeth aged, her skin grew increasingly sensitive. Some days, the makeup stung her skin. On other days, the makeup refuses to stay, and once steady now tremble. Eyes tire more easily, yet she never stops. Even as her understands shoulder most of the work, even as the pigment flakes away, even as the face in the mirror grows unfamiliar. Strangely, no one questions it. Court officials do not doubt. Envoys do not doubt. Not even the poets who sang of her radiant beauty questioned it. They knew this was not a natural state. Yet they remained indifferent, for illusion surpassed reality. Elizabeth had long transcended mortality. She was a flowing painting, a speaking statue. As long as the layers of powder were thick enough, no one needed to probe beneath the surface. Sometimes when the light fell just right, her makeup shimmered like a cold, glass mask. People paused to gaze, not because of her beauty, but because of her eternal stillness, as if time had forgotten her. Yet time never forgets, nor does skin. The longer the white lead was applied, the deeper she was eroded. Beneath the heavy makeup, she gradually faded. The initial disguise became her true face. The first spark of life disguised itself as a mask for weariness. Yet she still smiled, still stood, still turned her cheek for kisses through gloves and lace. For a queen must not falter. Not her face, not her bearing, not her scent. But on certain days, quiet days, the makeup would crack sooner. The smile no longer reached her eyes. Foundation grows heavy upon skin that thins by the day. In those moments, the maids tread lighter. Their gestures soften, breaths held. For should the mask slip too far, only flesh and weariness remain beneath. No fragrance in the world could mask such truth. Her face may be painted, her scent may be sculpted. Her gowns could be brushed to shimmer like frost in candlelight. But what Elizabeth could never fully conceal were her lips, the teeth behind her smile, the breath that wafted with her words. No matter how many words she chewed, how many layers of gloves she wore, that breath always pierced the mask she had so carefully built. Her fondness for sweets was no secret. Sugar had become a symbol of wealth in her era, an imported, refined, precious commodity. She could indulge in sugar in ways her subjects could only dream of. Candied violets, marzipan, boxed preserves, handfuls of sugared almonds. These delicacies she enjoyed not only at feasts. So often her teeth took notice. And indeed they did. Midway through her reign, decay began to gnaw at her teeth. First came dull spots, a faint ache. Then came sharp pain, swelling. and those silent hours pressing cloth to her cheek, silently praying the agony would pass. The royal physicians did all they could, but 16th-century dentistry was closer to torture than medicine. They dusted powder onto gums and had patients stew cloves. They scraped away decay with metal forceps. When absolutely necessary, they resorted to the tongs. Those iron tongs without anesthesia, simply clamped and pulled. Then they prayed for divine mercy. She resisted treatment fiercely. The thought of exposing such vulnerability, opening her mouth for others to peer into her mouth, made her stomach churn, but the pain eventually broke her. In the end, she permitted a few trusted physicians to treat her in a secluded chamber, far from the court's watchful eyes. They filled the gaps between her teeth with softened wax plugs, applied oil-soaked cloths, sometimes even ground opium into a paste to smear on her gums. Though the pain was temporarily numbed, the relief proved fleeting. Her breath began to change. It grew sour and thick. That scent carried not merely the lingering aroma of meals. It also carried a deeper, underlying stench of festering decay. That foul odor hovering at the edge of the air. It would make one involuntarily lean back. Yet no one spoke of it, at least not to her face. The queen should not have an odor. The queen must not have an odor. So when conversation became difficult, when people unconsciously turned their heads, when fans fluttered in the silent breeze, no one dared name the cause. They spoke in euphemisms. She seemed weary, not quite herself, always blaming the weather for draining her strength, blaming the room, the heat, the crowd, the season, never mentioning the scent itself. She understood, of course. You always understand. Human noses are brutally honest. More honest than words, more honest than mirrors. She sensed people's retreat, saw the hesitation in their eyes, felt the imperceptible pause when they drew near, so she adjusted herself. In enclosed spaces, she spoke less, carried handkerchiefs steeped in orange blossom or clove fragrance. She extended her hand gloved in scent-laden gloves, replacing the need to lean in. Distance became part of etiquette. Her court followed suit. People began mimicking her habits. Fans grew larger, gloves more fragrant. Even speech patterns shifted quietly. Long monologues diminished, nods increased. Gestures became more frequent, and polite silences more common. Flattery from afar grew easier, safer. Letters held no blunt truths, yet hints were everywhere. One visiting noble remarked on the solemn air that surrounded her. Another described the queen's presence as enveloping like a rich perfume. These carefully chosen euphemisms spoke the unspeakable. Behind the laced velvet, behind the legend. She was a woman who no longer displayed her radiant smile, yet she strove to maintain the illusion. In portraits, her lips were pressed together, perfectly sealed, her countenance serene. Poets extolled her smile as bright as sunshine, her breath as sweet as flowers. But behind closed doors, the doctor's concerns deepened. Teeth were extracted with increasing frequency. Some teeth even fell out on their own. Others required extraction. Over time, chewing became difficult. She began avoiding certain foods. She ate slowly, choosing only soft foods, soups, and stewed fruit. Even her favorite delicacies gradually lost their appeal. Of course, rumors spread. Whispers circulated that she occasionally refused public meals, leaving banquets early. After meals, she would rinse her mouth with rose water and rest for hours alone. But these stories would never be recorded in the official annals. The queen was indestructible. The queen was eternal. How could a single tooth bring her down? And so the silence persisted. In the dimness of her bedchamber, she bore it alone. The stench, the pain, the bleeding, the dread of the next meal. Courtiers kept their distance, carefully avoiding the affliction known to all, for if the queen's mouth betrayed her, the illusion would shatter, and no one wished to live in a world where the virgin queen apologized for bad breath. In the way they guarded appearances, a profound humanity shone through, even as reality receded. They were not lying, at least not entirely. What they guarded was a grand presence beyond any individual, a myth that had guided them through years of war, doubt, and play. If ignoring the scent was the price, so be it. But history has its own sense of smell. As time passed, the truth began to surface. In correspondence, in recorded treatments, in her gradually shifting daily habits, in the way she pressed her lips together, even when laughing, even when suffering. For beneath the painted face and perfumed gloves, lips endured torment in silence. And behind that silence, a queen ruled at the cost of pain none dared speak. In the quiet heart of the palace, behind carved doors and velvet curtains, stood a chair, at first glance unremarkable, simply made of wood, its cushion long past its prime. But lift the lid, and the truth lay waiting within. This was no throne, but the queen's private seat, her chamber pot, her place of relief, though none dared speak it aloud. It was deliberately adorned with plain dignity, resembling nothing more than a reading bench tucked in a corner. Yet beneath the cushion lay a circular opening. Beneath that opening, a chamber pot, most likely crafted from brass. If polished that week, it would gleam with a warm luster. This design balanced dignity and secrecy, for even a queen adorned in makeup and lace must ultimately relieve herself. She never went alone. Silent, trained attendants assisted throughout. They brought basins, cloths, and fresh herbs, poured fragrant vinegar into small bowls, folded towels with practiced precision, kept eyes downcast, never speaking, unless asked. Otherwise they never spoke, for this was not merely a physical necessity. It was a ritual. Whitehall Palace had no plumbing system, no flushing mechanism, no drainage system, and certainly no wrench to make filth vanish. Everything remained where it was, until someone came to remove it. That person was neither the queen nor a maid, but a lowly servant, sworn to secrecy, dedicated solely to clearing what the royal body discharges. Their duty is simple and constant. Though the room is not sealed, its doors remain tightly shut. Heavy drapes hang down. If window lattice is ever open, it is only a narrow slit high above. Air does not flow. It stagnates. This means the scent stagnates too. A silent presence, never acknowledged, yet ever minus present. The scent clings to the walls, whispering reminders. Beneath the brocades and ceremonial trappings, flesh and blood always remain. They tried to control it. Scented sackets hung from hooks. Bowls filled with dried lavender stood by the door. Orange peels steeped in vinegar rested in wide minus-rimmed dishes, allowing the air to slowly ferment toward something more tolerable. Occasionally, someone passes by carrying an incense burner, gently swaying. Wispy wisps of smoke drift in the stillness. But the fragrance always vanishes in an instant. The room will eventually return to its true self. Elizabeth cleanses her hands with rose water, sometimes dipping a cloth, sometimes pouring liquid from a small pitcher into a silver basin. This basin might have been used by dozens of hands. No one truly cleans it. They merely wipe it lightly. They only refresh themselves, pressing the incense minus soak cloth against their skin. They call it clean. It's easy to imagine a palace without filth. Picture polished floors and sparkling crystal chandeliers. Everything in perfect order. Everything under control. But beneath the surface, the truth always lurks. The queen's chamber pot was no exception. Every noble had their own. Every corridor bore faint traces of scent. The servants knew where to walk, where not to breathe deeply. Waste was cleared daily, sometimes frequently, sometimes less often. Depending on the court swims, the weather's winds, the cook swims. Every bucket, every pot must be carried barehanded to the pit, the cart, or the riverbank. Silently, carefully, fearing to draw attention. After all, no one wants to remember. Behind the velvet curtains, this reality always exists. The chamber pot itself was kept as clean as possible, scrubbed with vinegar, wiped with cloths, soaked in thyme and sage, covered with fresh linen when necessary. But the chamber pot beneath had its own story to tell. It held not just filth, but the queen's time, her silence, the rebellions of her stomach after feasts, and the pain of her body betraying her. Occasionally, perhaps it also held the relief of moments unseen. This matter was never spoken of. Not at court, not in private whispers. People referred only to her resting place or retreat. The word toilet had not yet taken its modern form. It was a ritual, not a place. For Elizabeth, this was the only room in the palace where no one expected her to speak. Even so, she maintained her graceful poise. Even here, her robe was carefully lifted by attendants. Her posture remained upright. Her countenance remained serene. For a queen could not break down, not even in private moments. Had she ever furrowed her brow or stumbled, the ladies Minos and Linus waiting would have turned away. Dignity must be guarded at all times. But the scent could not be concealed. On certain days, it seeped through the curtains, drifted down the corridor toward the neighboring chambers. No one spoke of it. They opened windows, lit more candles, doused their cuffs with more perfume. They pressed on. This scent had woven itself into the palace's very fabric. A fragrance of flesh and filth. A blend of vinegar and lavender. A sediment of soot and silence. It seeped into the stone walls, rising with the morning light. Not a foul stench, yet it carried the potent essence of humanity. No amount of concealment could dispel it. Elizabeth knew this well. She was no fool. She understood the limits of powder and disguise. But she also understood the necessity of disguise. Thus the chamber port remained carefully concealed, the scent meticulously controlled. Her gaze remained unwavering, for if the queen could smile upon her sickbed, she could surely convince the world of her perfect health while seated in quiet contemplation. Yet beneath her throne, beneath the floorboards, beneath the entire palace, something was brewing, far beyond what a chamber pot could contain. Far beyond what rosewater could cleanse. Even after leaving the chamber, the ritual was not over. The queen would raise her hands slightly. Attendants would present basins of warm rosewater or vinegar solution, sometimes infused with the scent of cloves or thyme. She did not scrub. No foam, no soap, only a gentle rinse, fingertips lightly wiped, palms smooth. This was not to remove filth, but to reshape an illusion. Such soft, fragrant gestures merged into royal daily life like silent bows. Those around her followed suit, not because they understood bacteria. None knew it then, but because touch itself was a daily ritual. The queen touched letters, palms, gloved fingertips, rings. At every formal occasion someone kissed the back of her hand. Each time, another's breath brushed her skin. But do not misunderstand. This was not a common hygiene practice. Elizabeth's gesture of rinsing her hands with rosewater was more a matter of etiquette than health. Most at courts are no need to cleanse their hands, unless compelled by food or filth. They wiped their fingers on napkins, sleeves, or tablecloth edges, then reached for their goblets. They plunged fingers into bowls of dried fruit, tore at roasts with bare hands, and then danced on. After the feast concluded, servants might present scented handkerchiefs at noble tables. These handkerchiefs were easily brushed over fingertips, as if wiping away mere dust. The wealthy never truly washed. They merely freshened up. Concealed. Court attendants often kept lemon peel in their pockets, to rub between palms and dispel pungent odors. Some carried small vials of vinegar in their purses, dipping gloves in it to feign refinement. Yet gloves seldom came off. The hands within whispered another truth. Ladies were no different. Long sleeves could be wiped clean, but grease clung stubbornly beneath thick rings. Silk gloves unturned for weeks. Wrist perfumes clashed fiercely with the scent of unwashed skin. Some wore scent balls. Small spheres filled with herbs and resins hung at the waist, or hid in folds of clothing. A subtle freshness coexisted with a more pungent truth. At court balls, hands clasped, spinning, raised high. Beads of sweat slipped easily. Heat waves surge. Glove rubs against glove. Bare fingertips brush satin ribbons. Fragrance mingles with skin. Yet none pause to wash. They are busy smiling and laughing, displaying grace beneath heavy gowns and tight laced shoes. Filth, like unwelcome guests, drifted among the crowd. None dared speak of it. Every gesture proclaimed refinement. Gloved hands extended for kissing. handkerchiefs pressed to noses and mouths when passing servants, fingertips dipped into shallow dishes of herbs before meals. These replaced soap and water in turn. In a palace as grand as Whitehall, they were sufficient, but invisible to the naked eye was the swift spread of germs, the touch of a palm, a cough during conversation, a borrowed fan. What the nobles passed were not just rumors. Illness spread silently between skin, the feverish figure in the ballroom's corner. By morning, it became street gossip. The sore throats in the chapel echoed through the corridors the next day. Yet the washbusiness remained empty. Rose water was still reserved solely for the Queen. Elizabeth was commendably more cautious than most. She understood the art of appearances. In her understanding, clean hands could bring clean rain, or at least fragrant rain. She always maintained a sacred distance. A queen must appear untouchable. Fragrant palms certainly helped, but her habits themselves held symbolic meaning. Her hands were indeed cleansed by water. Her cheeks were indeed lightly wiped. Her wrists were indeed perfumed. Yet her sleeves remained thick. The skin beneath her rings never saw the light. When the gloves were removed, if ever they were to be removed, they would tell a story, not of filth, yet not of freshness either. Somewhere between propriety and obstinacy. Whispers suggest Elizabeth had gloves custom made for sleep, lined with herbs, soaked in beeswax, designed to soothe the skin through the night, to conceal the traces left by the day. Truth or fiction, but it suited her style. Cleanliness was a performance. I'm membrane, a wisp of fragrance, a pair of gloves, straddling reality in touch. When dawn broke, the cycle began anew. The basin filled, vinegar stirred, cows neatly folded before the mirror. She dipped her fingertips into the bowl, then slowly lifted them, allowing the scent to rise like incense. The Queen's cleansing ritual, half mask, yet fully embraced. Meanwhile, in another corner of the palace, fingertips still stained with ink, soot, meat juices, and powdered sugar, they dip into bowls, tie shoelaces, adjust jewels. No one minds. For this performance has never been about cleanliness. It has always been about what people can pretend to see. If you walk through the White Hall with closed eyes, you might believe this place is spotless. If you judge by scent alone, you might think you're surrounded by saints. But when you open your eyes fully, the truth hits you like a wave. Behind every rose petal lies residue. Eye film clings to every pair of gloves. Behind every hand lingers the unwashed echo of another. And so we turn from fingertips to fabric. For what those hands touch most is not soap, but sleeve. Gowns brush elbows, cuffs are repeatedly adjusted. Silk scarves pass between fragrant bodies. Those gowns meticulously preserved, rarely laundered, brushed through the years held their own secrets. They hung like banners of authority. Each cape was embroidered with intricate patterns, trimmed with fur. Stiff, ornate collars added to their majesty. From afar, they seemed sewn by angels. Yet up close, they carried a human scent. Not an ordinary scent, but the essence of those who sweated through ceremonies, wore heavy wigs, and danced in velvet halls warmed only by candlelight and breath. These were not freshly laundered garments, but costumes of existence fragrant, yet never fully saturated. Each morning, the ritual began quietly. Maids turned cloaks inside out, fingertips gently tracing the lining. There, weeks of skin against fabric leave their mark. They shake off dust softly, never with force. For the threads are old, their ends harboring resentment. Each garment hangs by the cracked window, letting the breeze carry away the heaviest dust, but not for too long. Sunlight would fade the rich dyes, shatter the illusion of luxury. Here, there is no washing, no basins, no soap. These are luxuries, and water is regarded as an enemy. A single drop might leave a stain, a thorough rinse could unravel the fabric. Instead, stiff bristled brushes swept away surface dust. They didn't clean the garments, but made them presentable at least by dim candlelight. Scented sackets were tucked into every fold. Violet sackets paired with one gown, or orris root sackets with another. occasionally cloves or dried rose petals. They were sewn into hems, hidden between folds and shoulder seams. The purpose was not to impart fragrance, but to mask the inevitable odors. A cloak that never touched water would never carry the fresh scent of linen, but it could carry the scent of expense. Some cloaks, untouched for months, still carried the memory of each wearing. The collar where the queen's cheek had brushed left a faint trace of rouge. The dried wine stains at the cuffs word epa. The lingering scent of long days debating policy. The residual heat from heated chamber arguments. The fragrance of all minus night ceremonies. No one dares wash away these traces. They are not merely garments, but living archives. The queen's attendants mastered the art of maintenance without washing. If a stain became too conspicuous, they embroidered over it. If the scent grew overpowering, the garment was consigned to storage, awaiting a season's rest before reuse. Yet they never uttered the word dirty. Such a term was deemed vulgar, unworthy of the royal wardrobe's dignity. Elizabeth owned hundreds of gowns, yet she always favored her old loves, not because they were clean, but because of their exceptional performance. Stiff skirts held her posture steady. Layered corsets created a sense of strength. Meticulously brushed velvet remained as good as new on the throne, still carrying the stifling heat of last summer's midsummer when viewed up close. Even the linen petticoats worn next to the skin were honored only when absolutely necessary, a term defined strictly by the court, perhaps a dab of vinegar into the arms, or a scented sachet tucked into the bodice. Washing was the work of servants, of peasant women, of those without tapestries in their bedrooms. The air in the dressing room bore the weight of this attitude. It was neither fresh nor decayed, but something in between. The scent of dried herbs mingled with traces of stale sweat, the cloying sweetness of rose oil intertwined with the sharp bite of camphor. This was the sediment of daily toil, distilled into a familiar scent, into a part of the crown itself. For an envoy once murmured, the scent of the English court is like a burning cathedral. No one contradicted him. The comparison was not far off. The scent of pine resin, smoke, sanctity. But strongest of all was the scent of flammability. Indeed, the attendants worried that musk, perfumed oils, and powders smeared upon the fabrics might spark if brought near the hearth. Silent accidents happened: a sleeve brushing a candle, a sash grazing the lantern, and smoke would rise unnoticed. But none of this was spoken of. Image always took precedence over risk. In this court, cleanliness and the appearance of cleanliness were two different things. A cloak without a single stain was suspicious. It meant it had never been worn by the queen. It had not absorbed her scent, had not played its part in the grand theatre of monarchy. Every garment told a story not of newness, but of continuity, ritual, and scent as memory, as power, as disguise. For no one exudes the scent of lavender and myrrh without reason. It requires meticulous planning, strict self-discipline, and a profound understanding. Even grime can be fashioned into an image of nobility. And above all cloaked gowns, above layers of brocade fragrance, sat an even more exquisitely crafted presence. Those curls were not her own. Those curled tresses did not spring from the queen's head, but from wig stands and drawers. This hair existed in its own realm, possessing its own scent, its own rules, its own secrets. So when our gaze shifts from her shoulders to her crown, we must examine the object atop the queen's head, another layer of disguise, another mask, another source of fragrance. And this wig, too, had never been washed. Above all the unwashed capes and perfumed gowns, the queen's wigs formed a kingdom unto themselves. Dozens of wigs were displayed on stands in the bedchamber, each meticulously styled into stiff curls, towering spirals, or intricately woven waves. Their fragrance bore no resemblance to natural hair, instead exuding the scent of cinnamon bark, violet powder, burnt grass, and stale candle smoke, a deliberate choice. Elizabeth wore wigs not to deceive everyone at court, knew her own hair was sparse. Its coppery sheen had long faded to a fragile ash-white. The wigs were not disguise, but display. Each was a meticulously sculpted wax figure, dusted with perfume so potent that a mere breeze would fill the corridor with fragrance before the queen herself appeared. But this came at a price. The wigs weren't ever washed, not once. Too fragile for water, too stiff to comb. They clung to whatever touched them. Foundation residue clings to the roots, blush traces settle beside the temples. On hot days, sweat seeps from the queen's scalp, mingling with oils to form a scent uniquely hers, sweet yet spicy, faintly tart, yet unmistakably regal. The wig attendants exerted every effort. They gently dusted each wig with perfumed starch, then sprinkled it with lavender or bergamot shavings, perhaps a touch of vinegar to neutralize the pungent odor. But the fundamental problem remained unsolved. Perfumed wigs remained, after all, wigs that had been worn. In the height of summer, the violet moisture-sued bedchamber became an airtight chamber, and those scents grew ever more overpowering. When the queen leaned in to whisper to her attendant, the man would often flinch slightly, not from fear, but from the potent fragrance rising from her hairline. The scent wasn't pungent, but suffocating, a blend of heat, herbs and history, tracked within every strand. You didn't smell it, you endured it. Over time, each wig developed its own distinct character. One carried the deep, spicy notes of cloves and pepper, another exuded the cloying sweetness of dried roses. One unfortunate wig, stored too close to tapestries during a damp spring, acquired a lingering hint of mold. Dubbed the Widowmaker, none dared mention it when the queen wore it. Cleaning, of course, was unthinkable. Wigs were sacred objects, inextricably linked to royal ritual. Cleaning equated to erasing countless hours of labor and layers of meaning. Thus they were dried by windows, brushed with stale hair, and stored in boxes lined with mint leaves. Whether this practice proved effective remains debatable. This olfactory drama held its own significance. The queen's scent rose from her hair, cloak, gloves, and skin, transforming into a silent signal. It signaled her entrance into the hall, announcing to foreign envoys that they stood before an extraordinary presence. It also served as a reminder to attendants allergic to must to step back. Wigs were no ordinary hair accessories, they were grounds of disguise heavier than appearance, suffocating to wear, yet unforgettable. Some were inlaid with pearls, others adorned with feathers or tulle. All wigs were stiff and stone hard with hair glue without the skillful securing of pins. A strong gust could have swept the entire wig away. Rumor has it the queen sometimes slept upright to protect her wig. During breaks she used a special stand to hold her head steady, while maids quietly swept loose strands from the wig at dawn, fearful of waking her. These tales may be exaggerated, yet they hold a grain of truth. After all, image is everything, and the queen's image carried a unique aura. None at court could perfectly replicate it, despite their best efforts to imitate. Lower nobility dusted their hair with similar powders, hoping to borrow a sliver of the queen's aura. Yet they always lacked the depth, the years of wearing wigs like armor, the accumulated weight of history. What they possess is merely a cloying lithe imitation, nowhere near the rich, intense depth of the queen's original formula. Standing close, it feels like being in a ceremony, not just a visual feast, but a sensory baptism. You see the dazzling sheen of the wig, the shimmering glints of powdered cream, the stiff lace trim pressed against the temples. You also smell the sediment of history, the stubborn persistence, and the fierce resistance to the ordinary. Beneath layers of powder and paste, behind the unyielding curls and the wax that never melts, lies a living human egg, weary, aging, struggling in the sweat of sacred rituals. But the court needs no mortals, they crave monuments. So she offered herself daily, changing wigs with each dawn. Like cloaks and gloves, each wig was merely a facade. Deeper layers, more elaborate rituals all concealed the truth. When the gaze shifted from crown to fingertips, the story continued. In every fragrant glove and unwashed hand of power. When visitors stepped into the inner chambers of Elizabeth's court, they entered a world built not only of velvet, but of scent. The corridors were thick with the air of calculation. Not chaos, not filth, but carefully layered fragrances, infused into every thread, dusted over every wig. It was smeared onto every pair of gloves. Politics here never began with words. It began with scent. If a noble woman wore violet oil, it signaled refined taste. If a courtier's cloak carried musk or civet, it signified wealth, or at least access to the wealthy. If a poor attendant was permitted to draw near, a faint whiff of old woolen derbs from his sleeves would linger. Their presence was merely tolerated for a moment, for in this world stench signified status, or rather the absence of stench signified status. The Queen herself was a meticulously orchestrated symphony of scents. She must not only project an unapproachable demeanor, but also exude an unapproachable fragrance, and she succeeded, whether standing atop the grand staircase, or gliding through her private chambers. Her scent always arrived before her form. People turned not because they heard footsteps, but because they caught the blend of rose oil mingling with something deeper, more exotic, more costly. This scent was her shield, her calling card, her brand, meticulously designed to be an overwhelming presence. No words needed to announce her. She left a trail of memory in every room she passed through. This was not luxury but strategy. When foreign envoys later described the atmosphere of the English court, they spoke not only of its splendor, but also of the intensity in the air. They said the scent was like a sanctuary, like the Damascus market, like a July funeral. These were not compliments, yet each signaled the Queen's presence. In an age when letters took weeks to arrive and messages could be forged, the scent of a person proved remarkably reliable. If you held high status, your scent would proclaim it. Not merely a carefully maintained freshness, but a richly intricate, meticulously designed composition. Within this court no scent was more deliberately crafted than Elizabeth's. Her fragrance shifted with the seasons or the political winds. During tense negotiations it was frankincense and saffron. Lavender and orange blossom greeted suitors. When suspicion of betrayal arose, she turned to frankincense and wormwood, as if silently warning the entire court. These choices were always keenly observed. Diplomats strained to imitate them, seeking to please her sense of smell. Even if they failed to please her ears, some succeeded. Others overdid it. Stepping into the audience chamber, they carried the acrid scent of burning spice markets. Such missteps were never spoken of, yet they remained forever etched in memory. Perfume was a delicate game of strategy. One misstep revealed embarrassment. The fragrance warfare at state banquets grew ever more intense. Layers upon layers of scents clashed and competed within the halls. The Queen's tablecloth was soaked in rosewater. Silverware polished with orange oil. Gloves exuded ambergris. The entire feast was less about savoring delicacies than a contest of breath control. Those who couldn't endure could only cough softly behind their napkins, praying no one noticed. This was not merely a symbol of extravagance, but a demonstration of power. If Elizabeth's scent could fill the entire room, it would mean this space belonged to her. If her presence could be conveyed through smell, revealed even before she spoke, then her reign would be perfected. Even in paintings, artists strove to capture this aura. They depicted her rosy skin, accentuated by perfumed gloves, and shrouding her portraits in an invisible haze. Later viewers may not notice, but her closest attendants knew well. To be near the Queen was to breathe in her rule. Court life adjusted accordingly. Meetings were always scheduled after her bath. Visitors were reminded to wear perfume, but not too much. When ladies minus waking followed the Queen, they always carried sachets filled with dried herbs suspended behind them, ready to harmonize the air when needed. The Privy Council deliberated state affairs amid the rich fragrance of oregano and burning resin. Decisions were born amidst whirling scented mists. When rebellion came, it pierced through the lavender's fragrance. Today we might scoff at such notions. Imagine a monarch obsessed with scent, as if fragrance alone could sustain a kingdom. Yet in her world it truly did. Scent signified loyalty. Scent demanded obedience. Scent carried fear, hope, and command. All emotion condensed into an invisible veil. Nothing silenced a room more effectively. Nothing silenced the crowd more powerfully than overwhelming them with sheer presence, without uttering a word. The instant she stepped into the great hall, the air seemed to freeze. It was not the ordinary flowing air, neither fresh nor free. It pressed against the skin like a heavy, warm current, as if breathed upon countless times by countless lungs. Then the scent struck suddenly, not one note at a time, but a surging symphony. Roses, musk, cloves, wine, aged fabrics, incense, and some deeper, tart yet sweet essence, sweeping in like a tempest. This was no accident. It was the very essence of courtier life at its zenith. Each person passing through the velvet curtains added their unique fragrance to this royal bouquet. The Duke's beard might be steeped in rosewater, yet his breath carries the lingering echo of brandy. A maid's scent might bear the imprint of pressed violets. Mixed with yesterday's stood garlic. Some carry the fragrance of sandalwood and frankincense. The less fortunate bear the mustiness of mold, damp shoes, or sweat from long minus-worn courses. Yet no one noticed any more. It had become background noise for the nostrils. Everyone tacitly pretended all scents were tolerable. Such a blend, this crucible of humanity's finest and most wretched aspects, had become a symbol of status, for an envoys described it in veiled terms, calling it a warm atmosphere or rich immediacy. But everyone knew, standing for but a moment at the heart of Queen Elizabeth's court, one inhales decades of accumulated scents. They lie settled in wood, velvet, and flesh. The fireplace offers slight relief. The acrid scent of burning oak or the cloying sweetness of smoke occasionally pierces the haze, yet it is fleeting. The heat intensifies the stench. The stale odors trapped within carpets and cushions rise like steam from a bath. The perfumes meant to mask the foul smells only make the scent more complex. A stench masked by lavender is still a stench. It's just a bit more floral. The servants strive to control this chaos. They hang bundles of dried herbs in corners, stuffing mint leaves into tapestry crevices, even waving small jars of incense back and forth in the corridors. But this was akin to spraying perfume on a battlefield. The stench always prevailed. Strangely, no one seemed to truly mind. This was the norm. Just as the Queen's fragrance signified power, the collective scent of the court proclaimed existence. You are here. You truly exist. You are part of this machine. And all great machines are alike, operating at high temperatures, noisy, and not necessarily clean. People gradually adapt, learn to hold their breath at the right moments, politely turn aside when whispering, pretend not to notice when the scent of gump woolens or when drifts from the next seat. Etiquette manuals never mention scent directly, but everyone knows this dance. The gestures, the breaths, the smiles. Clothing is key too. Layers upon layers of garments. Capes rarely washed. Gloves reused. Sweat minus, soaked undergarments spouted and recycled. The fabric itself seems alive. Each fiber carries the wearer's history. A mere brush past reveals a man's status, a scent of breakfast, traces of anxiety. Occasionally, an accident occurs. A wisp of unfamiliar scent. A sharp whiff of decay. A reminder to the world. No matter how gilded or adorned, the human body remains flesh. A distinguished guest once fainted in the side chamber, not from emotional turmoil, but from a sudden, suffocating shift in scent. No one laughed. All understood and spoken. Such things could happen to anyone. Even the Queen was not spared. Though her natural scent was meticulously controlled, the air around her could not be concealed. Attendants crowded together. Their individual scents collided like ships in a storm. Rumor has it that one advisor possessed an astonishingly persistent scent. It lingered for nearly an hour after he departed. Eventually he was reassigned to outdoor duties. Within these callous walls, scent becomes part of memory. You remember not just the words spoken, but the smells that accompanied them. The cinnamon notes in a diplomat's breath. The musty mold of an elderly noble's robes. The pungent citrus trail of a newly favored courtier. These scents linger longer than words. Yet even when odors become overpowering, no one attempts to change them. Cleanliness is not the goal. Survival is the core. In the hierarchy of needs, nasal comfort ranks far below the stability of the crown. Thus the court endures. People powder and perfume themselves. Layers upon layers of concealment. shallow breaths, frequent smiles. For scent is not a flaw in the system. Scent itself is the system, a living map of power, privilege, and proximity. As we delve deeper into the mysteries of Elizabethan daily rituals, this truth remains constant. Beneath powdered faces and embroidered robes, after political maneuvering and lavish ceremonies, the same inescapable reality always persists. Everyone emits a scent, and everyone pretends not to smell it. The image Queen Elizabeth presented to the world carried a peculiar theatricality. This was not merely about power or control. It was about sustaining a meticulously crafted, immaculately maintained image. Even the grime beneath the surface had to gleam. This was no longer a real woman. It was a symbol, a ghost of essence wrapped in mythical satin. People knelt not before flesh and blood, but before an illusion draped in silk and legend. This illusion must exude fragrance, even if beneath it lies sweat accumulated over weeks. Each morning, attendants begin setting the stage. They do not really dress her. They assemble her entire being. First comes the foundation, the skin. It must appear pale, smooth, flawless, not because she favors this hue, but because pallor symbolizes virtue, chastity, and a sense of superiority over those toiling beneath the scorching sun. Thus the maids thickly applied Venetian white to her face, this mixture of white leadened vinegar cracked with time, yet no one dared criticize it. From afar, one saw a porcelain complexion. Up close, one knew it was a layered scab of poison. Aim austro and heavier with each passing year. Her blush was not the soft pink of modern women. No, it was made from mercury-laced cinnabar. It gave her a brilliant flush, yet slowly corroded her nerves. The toxic pigment may have enhanced her radiance, but it also brought tremors, insomnia, and God knows what other ailments. Yet no one dared whisper. The Queen never showed fatigue, only deep thought. She was not frail, merely deep in thought. Her delicate, finely arched brows were often outlined with soot or dye. In portraits they appeared elegant, in person perhaps slightly strange. But who dared criticize? Even when she entered the hall with soot beneath her eyes, her courtiers would hail it as sacred fashion. Such is the nature of power. Beauty is unnecessary. Only the absence of doubt is required. Yet what truly sustains the illusion is light. For no one has ever seen Elizabeth bathed in the midday sun. Audiences always took place in candlelit chambers or rooms veiled by heavy drapes. Soft shadows concealed the imperfections beneath her painted face. The flickering candlelight cast a subtle glow upon her skin, diverting attention from dry patches, flaking foundation, and the subtle cracks in her white makeup. Even the presence of mirrors was strictly controlled. Her private quarters contained few. Those that existed were meticulously positioned. Light was cast from angles that concealed flaws most effectively. Not only did others need to believe this illusion, she herself had to believe it. At the very least, she had to believe in its necessity. For once the image cracked, even the slightest crack, everything could come crashing down. And if people glimpsed the truth, the collapse would be inevitable. Beneath the makeup lies a woman aging rapidly. Her teeth are rotting. Pockmarks scar her face from smallpox. Her once fiery red hair has thinned to the point of needing wigs to conceal it. But the story cannot tolerate decay, so she transforms completely, becoming a walking statue, a living, fragrant oil painting. Perhaps we should feel pity. This sympathy is indeed moving, but equally important is recognizing her role in sustaining this deception. She demanded it, enforced it, built systems around it. Maids were strictly forbidden to speak of what they saw. Court officials knew to praise, not critique. The entire court became an endless drama in the drama of the Virgin Queen. This was not hygiene as we know it today. It was ritual, not about cleanliness, only about meaning. The lavender scent did not signify purity. It proclaimed inviolability. The silk's smoothness was not for comfort, only to symbolize innocence. Even when ravaged by illness, she must project an unbreakable image. Illusion proved mightier than flesh, myth more sacred than truth. No wonder modern historians struggle to distinguish the real Elizabeth from her carefully crafted persona. Was she brimming with confidence, or driven to desperation by worldly expectations? Was she proud, or imprisoned by the role she herself had created? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. Perhaps she was simply lost in the performance. Even her portraits lied. Painters were ordered to beautify her features, to idealize her complexion, to elongate her neck. The Queen held the final verdict. If a painting revealed too much humanity, it was discarded. Only the sacred was permitted to remain. Only perfection endured. Imagine possessing supreme power. Even your portraits must lie for you. Yet behind closed doors, she must surely feel this burden. Long hours sitting still as paint dries on her face. The rigid constraints of embroidered robes. Layers of adornment, more like armor than clothing. Yet she persists, not merely by choice, but because she has no other option. In an era where female authority faces constant scrutiny, the perfect performance is a rule for survival. The slightest lapse invites questioning. So she smiles and straightens her back. Dressed in white, she glows like pearls, even as her body craves rest. Ironically, the power image and mystery we now revere arose from beneath layers of powder and perfume, born from sweat concealed by silk. Those suffocating beauty rituals would bring tears to any modern duty blogger. Yet what we remember is always the myth, not the toil. The fragrance, not the sweat. Perhaps this is precisely what she desired. Not remembered as mortal, but remembered through eternal presence. Remembered in purity, restraint, and untouched grace. Yet beneath the foundation, Elizabeth remained flesh and blood. Had her skin could speak, it might have told a very different story. The people of Elizabeth's era did not fear bacteria, for they did not even know such things existed. Yet they did fear something. Something more familiar to their noses than to their minds. They believed disease sprang from foul air, from invisible clouds of stench drifting over cities, palaces, and wilderness. This belief was known as the miasma theory. For centuries, it shaped everything from architecture to personal hygiene. If the air reeked of foulness, it was deemed dangerous. If it wafted fragrance, it was deemed safe. The logic was simple. Though flawed, it sufficed as a rule for living. In the image minus conscious court, this notion held sway. Foul odors were not merely unpleasant. They symbolized corruption, sin, or disease. Fragrance, conversely, represented purity, control, and most crucially, health. This belief allowed people to coexist with filth, provided the stench wasn't too overpowering. If an odor did arise, it was masked with floral scents. Thus, perfume was born. The more luxurious and potent the scent, the greater its perceived protective power. Elizabeth Furs would never risk damaging her public image. By smelling like London sewers, her court was steeped in fragrances, ointments, herbal sachets, and scented candles. People didn't believe these items cleansed the body, but firmly believed they could banish disease. They served more as talismans than practical items. Bundles of dried lavender hung upon the walls. Carpets were sprinkled with rosewater. Even gloves were steeped in musk and amber. The result was not cleanliness, but dizziness. Rooms reeked of gardens, yet the walls were covered in mold. The floors were stained and mottled. Unwanted creatures lurked in the corners, but people still trusted their sense of smell. Scent was their compass, their early warning system, their fragile defense. When Queen Elizabeth glided past, trailing jasmine and musk in her wake, people firmly believed they were not only within royal halls, but also in a safe sanctuary. Of course, the truth was far less poetic. Beneath layers of perfume, the Queen's world bred germs just as much as a commoner's cottage. The sewers were crude and inadequate. The water was foul. Rats were regular guests at court. But as long as the air carried no scent of death, people hypnotized themselves into believing disaster did not exist. The irony was almost suffocating. They strove to smell sweet and pleasant, yet turned a blind eye to the real dangers around them. They believed that as long as something didn't stink, it was harmless. This was reality evasion, perfumed and intoxicating. To be fair, it wasn't entirely their fault. They had no microscopes. They didn't understand infectious diseases. They did not know cholera could kill without foul odors, nor that typhus needed no foul wind to announce its arrival. So they fought the invisible threat with visible rituals. Herbal incense wafted through corridors. Orange peels lined windowsills. Dried rose petal pouches hung from wrists. These were not merely customs. They were hope. Desperate, fragrant hope. A yearning for a world more rational than reality. Even Queen Elizabeth, educated to the highest standards and surrounded by the finest physicians, relied on this belief. She clutched her scented gloves, insisted on rinsing her mouth with rose water, as if these could ward off decay. In a twisted sense, they did work, not medically of course, but socially. The Queen smelled finer than commoners, naturally healthier. Scent became a badge of status. Noble worth could be gauged by fragrance. The powerful wore musk. The powerful wore spices, while the poor carried sweat, soot, and the myriad odors of the day. Cleanliness had never been about hygiene, only about rank. In an era when diseases had no names, and symptoms were often mistaken for divine punishment, scent gave people a sense of control. It made them believe they could fight back, stuffing an extra handful of dried mint into their pillows, sprinkling a few more drops of lavender on their collars. These were the shields they raised each morning, not because they worked, simply because there was nothing else. Looking back now, we often sneer, roll our eyes at their ignorance. But are we truly different? We still link cleanliness to scent. Fresh linen, lemon disinfectant, minty air. We buy scented candles and air fresheners promising tranquility and fragrance. We mask reality's odors with more elaborate illusions, no different from them. The only distinction lies in this. Today, we know precisely what we conceal. Queen Elizabeth's court possessed no such luxury. They couldn't Google plague symptoms. They couldn't disinfect rooms at the push of a button. They had only time in abundance, hope in their hearts. And this conviction, if only the world could smell like meadows, perhaps it would be as peaceful as meadows. It was not so. Disease still raged. People still died. But at least they died believing they had done everything possible. This conviction held a heartbreaking humanity. Even when what the eyes saw contradicted what the nose smelled, they chose to trust the nose, pouring all their fears into a bottle of rose oil, praying it would dispel the gloom. Thus the palace remained perpetually fragrant, shining brightly within a pure illusion. Elizabeth, sovereign of fragrance, towering above the stench emanating from her crumbling foundations. The air filled with the scent of cloves and chamomile. Yet beneath the sewers, the foul filth of unspoken truths and Ergolden's churned. This was a world cloaked in perfume and denial. Perhaps that was precisely why it endured. After all, fragrance always sounded sweeter than truth. She may rule her kingdom with a steady hand, but Elizabeth's body tells a different truth. As her image becomes almost mythical, pale face, fiery red hair, eternal youth, her teeth rot beneath her skin. Each step brings excruciating bone pain. Fevers invaded like unwelcome guests. But in this court built upon appearances, the performance must go on. There was no place for pain, so she hid it, not only from her subjects, but from her closest advisors and courtiers, sometimes even from herself. Each morning, she donned the royal armor, heavy lead minus-based foundation, stiff ceremonial gowns embroidered with intricate patterns, garments drenched in perfume, and that practiced smile. She knew her presence mattered far more than her beating pulse. To touch was endured. Exhaustion was concealed beneath layers of makeup. She stood through ceremonies, teeth clenched. Her eyes betrayed not a single ripple. Even as fever scorched her entire body, she persisted in appearing clad in white, like a spectre of strength. But flesh and blood have their limits. Even wrapped in velvet, when her body finally collapsed, unable to sit through another meeting or stand for another ceremonial procession, She withdrew to her private chambers. Not a hospital or sanatorium, but her bedchamber, accessible only to a select few trusted attendants and physicians. The curtains fell. Beyond the walls, rumors began to circulate. She was resting. She was tired. She had a cold. Only the truth was deliberately avoided. Because the truth was too human. Deep within the chambers, the queen shed her regal aura, becoming a patient. Obsessed gums throbbed unbearably through sleepless nights. She clenched her jaws. Rose-water-soaked linen sheets became drenched with sweat. She hoped the fragrance might deceive her senses, bringing fleeting peace. When agony neared the brink of collapse, she could only turn to the meager comforts her area offered. A pouch of cloves to crush between her teeth. A cup of spiced wine laced with opium. Bundles of dried herbs ground into a paste and pressed against her temples. These were her tools. Primitive, fragrant, and tinged with magic. Not because they worked, but because they helped her believe they might. Elizabethan physicians were confident yet limited in their abilities. They wore rough collars. They carried vials of potions promising relief but seldom delivering it. They spoke of humoral balance rather than bacteria or viruses. The queen's physician, though cautious, was also entrenched in this system. He prescribed what he could. Essential oils for her temples. Powders mixed into wine. Sometimes only silence. He knew what she truly needed. A private space, unseen by others. So, beyond the palace walls, the story continued. The queen radiant, the queen unbreakable, the queen eternal. But within the inner chambers, she lay upon a silk miner's drapery couch. Clove oil pressed against her gums. Tears held back with each swallow, for crying was unbecoming of a queen. Pain was unbecoming of a queen. Admitting vulnerability would shatter the illusion she'd painstakingly built over decades. She was not merely a woman. She was the embodiment of England. But illusions inevitably show cracks. As time passed, faint fissures gradually appeared. Her voice, once clear and commanding, now trembled slightly. Her posture, once proud and upright, grew increasingly stooped and hunched. Public appearances grew shorter, while silences stretched longer. Yet no one dared speak the truth. No one mentioned the puffiness in her cheeks, or the pallor beneath her foundation. Everyone knew it well. To acknowledge the queen's suffering would mean confronting the brutal reality that all mortals must die. This was unthinkable. Even as the pain intensified, Elizabeth clung stubbornly to the performance. Her gowns grew heavier, her jewels more extravagant, her wigs taller and more absurd, as if piling on more external adornments could sustain herself. Yet the truth was simpler and more sorrowful. She was utterly exhausted, not merely from advancing age or illness, but from the endless pretense. In the quiet chambers of her bedchamber, she would occasionally clasp the familiar scents that had accompanied her throughout her life. Lavender crushed between her fingers, the sage hanging by the heart, the bitterness of poppy syrup spreading across her tongue. These were not merely comforts. They were eternal anchors in a world of fading things. Her body, her strength, even the loyalty of her courtiers. They had long begun whispering of succession. Some say she defied death with pride. Others claim she simply refused to admit defeat. But perhaps neither was true. Perhaps she simply didn't know how to stop being queen. The crown had become her skin. To remove it would mean exposing the truth beneath. A woman long since exhausted, yet she persisted in her duties. At her deathbed, even the royal physicians could only watch helplessly. Opium numbed her senses, yet the infection in her mouth never subsided. Her nights were restless and sleepless. Her dreams were shrouded in a haze of fever and regret. She no longer trusted mirrors, no longer trusted her own reflection. Instead, she surrounded herself with symbols, paintings, music, candlelight, and fragrances. Anything that might evoke her former identity. Anything that might make her feel more like a queen than a patient. Looking back now, this situation was both tragic and inevitable. Of course she hid. Of course she denied. Because in the world she inhabited, vulnerability was not merely uncomfortable. It was deadly. The limping queen would eventually be replaced, A queen who frowns in pain invites suspicion. So she forced smiles through rotten teeth, stood firm despite waves of nausea. When agony reached its peak, she retreated behind fragrant curtains. Let legend take over. Ultimately, her greatest feat lay not in governance or conquest, but in proving to the world she was no mortal, while retaining such profound humanity, with but a hint of perfume, a few poppy petals, and endless disguises. Of all Elizabeth's sacrifice for the crown, the most agonizing sacrifice may have been relinquishing the right to show her sickness. Her kingdom could endure storms and rebellion, but the sight of a monarch staggering was unthinkable. In this world, illness was not merely a burden, it was a threat to power, a stain upon the carefully constructed illusion. Thus she refused to show weakness. Health slipped away behind doors seldom opened. Yet she herself, wrapped in satin and powdered, she glides through ceremonies with grace. She forces smiles through pain. Image matters far more than comfort. When legs grow weakened, the spine stiffens. She chooses stilettos over soft shoes. When jaws ache unbearably, she chooses laughter over silence. When pulses dance wildly at her throat, she straightens her back. She lifted her chin, pretending the world beneath her feet remained as solid as ever. She did not limp. She did not lean. If she ever stumbled, it was surely due to uneven flooring. Never because her body betrayed her. The white robe became her emblem, not for practicality or flattery, simply because it made her seem transcendent. In candlelight, the robes shimmered with a halo of sanctity, whispering invincible majesty. No one wished to imagine the queen curled in bed, pounding her ribs or moaning from toothache. They craved a living statue, a mythical presence. Elizabeth fulfilled this expectation daily. The court played its part. When she showed weariness, subjects bowed deeper. When her voice grew hoarse, laughter rang louder. None dared mention the sweat beading her brow, or her trembling hands. Such details were quietly overlooked, like crumbs swept from a banquet table. Maintaining the illusion became everyone's shared responsibility. To serve the crown was to guard its dignity, even as the body beneath it rotted away. Yet behind closed doors, this pretense proved exhausting. Maids not only dressed her, but concealed the ravages of time. The corset was laced tighter to force an upright posture. Extra padding was sewn into the gown, creating an illusion of fullness where there was only decay. The makeup served not only to beautify, but also to conceal. Blush was applied to the cheeks. White powder outlined the jawline. Lip gloss masked the dry, cracked lips. Each public appearance was a performance. The dressing room was her backstage. The corridors of Whitehall were her stage. The people of England were her audience. Even when her arms could scarcely lift for a wave, she persisted in waving greetings. Even when toothache made chewing impossible, she sat composed at banquets, picking at her food, pretending to relish the feast. The script was long written. She memorized every line. During these low points, she would sometimes sit for portraits. Painters were ordered to depict her youth, not reality. They smoothed wrinkles, brightened eyes, erased veins on her hands. The woman in the final paintings had long vanished from the mirror. Yet the woman on canvas still ruled, frozen in time, forever untouched. These portraits became propaganda of power, reinforcing an image her body could no longer uphold. And she persisted, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of fear, or perhaps she simply didn't know how to shed the queen's mantle, to abdicate, to rest, to admit weakness. All seemed to invite chaos. She had reigned too long. Her very existence had become the bedrock of stability. If she faltered, who could take her place? So she endured. The back pain, the headaches, the bone-minus chilling fatigue seeking like cold rain into her marrow. She sustained it all with graceful poise, unyielding will, and extraordinary skill at disguise. Even in the hall where the cold wind howled, with only a handful of courtiers present, she still presented the image of the queen they expected. And the courtiers never demanded more. This tacit understanding bordered on tragedy. The court dared not speak the truth. The monarch could not show weakness. The nation preferred to wallow in illusion. It wasn't that people didn't care about her health. They simply refused to confront it. They had been taught to associate her with eternity. To acknowledge her mortal flesh would be to shatter the very concept of Elizabeth. Whispers circulated in private. Elder statesmen exchanged glances when she stumbled. One or two maids shed silent tears while changing sweat-soaked sheets. Yet none of this ever surfaced. Never to grace the public stage, Elizabeth appeared unharmed. From afar, the court resembled a celebration. Up close, it was a balancing act. Everyone treaded cautiously, steering clear of every crack. The throne stood firm, but the floorboards beneath creaked. The Queen remained majestic, standing at the center, smiling, nodding, issuing commands. Yet she feigns no awareness of the tremors. In a sense, this is her final triumph, not for wars won or foes outmaneuvered, but for this sheer willpower. To stand firm when every bone and muscle craves rest. To step onto the stage when the curtain should have fallen. When she finally exited, she departed to applause, not pity. As we look back on the years that followed, one truth grows ever clearer. The immortality of Elizabeth's image was no accident. It was an image meticulously crafted, tenaciously maintained, and painfully sustained. She poured everything into preserving it, even when there was little left. And so it was. She ensured history would remember the Queen, not the mortal, the totem, not the affliction, the legend, not the solitude. They say imitation is the sunset's form of flattery, but in Queen Elizabeth I's court, it was more a matter of survival. If the Queen wore a certain perfume, her courtiers would follow suit. If she habitually pursed her lips in thought, within a week, half the Privy Council would mimic the gesture. This imitation stemmed not only from reverence, but because it had become an unwritten rule, a law for preserving status, a principle for securing favor, and most crucially, a means of survival, ensuring one's head remained firmly on one's shoulders. The Queen's habits permeated the court, like perfume seeping into silk, gowns embroidered with satin trimmings, gloves steeped in essential oils, and meticulously choreographed speech-like banquet seating arrangements were first adopted by favored courtiers. They mimicked her gestures with theatrical precision, and the rest soon followed, whether willingly or not. Though no decree explicitly commanded emulate the Queen's speech, all understood implicitly. Her intonation became the court's language, her poise transformed into courtly etiquette, and her fragrance, oh, that became the very air of the court. The trend began silently. A slight tilt of the head, a graceful flick of the wrist, carefully designed pauses in conversation. Then came the glove craze. Of course, not ordinary gloves, but gloves steeped in rose oil, trimmed with lace, stored in lavender sachets. Gradually, entering the council chamber felt like stepping into a perfumery. The air was thick with floral scents, spices, and an underlying musk. The older gentlemen resisted this trend in silence, content to dab a hint of fragrance on their cuffs. The younger generation, however, embraced it with dangerous fervor. It was rumored that one young noble, desperate to stand out at a royal banquet, doused himself head to toe in musk and ambergris. He nearly fainted before dessert was served. The scent emanating from his double-layered shirt lingered for days. Even several attendants felt nauseous during morning prayers. Another rumor, half-Drew and half-Smith, though never officially confirmed, claimed that once, the sleeve of his embroidered coat brushed against a candlestick's edge. The fabric, saturated with oil and powdered perfume, instantly ignited into a bonfire reminiscent of a church graveyard. Fortunately, he suffered only a bruised ego, yet this incident earned him a new nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life. No one advised him to moderate his habits. Instead, this tale circulated through the palace corridors, becoming a cautionary anecdote, not a warning against excessive fragrance, but a reminder to keep clear of open flames. The lesson lay not in diminishing fragrance, but in treating open flames with caution. Strange as it may seem, this very atmosphere was cultivated by the Queen herself. She shaped scent into a symbol of taste, status, and elegance. It was never merely about fragrance. Rather, it conveyed a message. I stand above filth. I transcend the mundane and decay. My body shall never decay, but radiate with brilliance, shimmering with the scent of roses and spices, not the fragrance of sweat and death. Since the queen herself was so fragrant, her council members naturally fell into step. They also imitated other habits of the queen. The way she paced, the rhythm of her speech, the habit of tapping the armrest with a ringed finger when bored. Some emulate her cautious diplomatic maneuvers, pausing deliberately before answering to appear sharp, even when they are not. Others master the art of distracted listening. This skill, honed over years of lies and flattery, the queen has perfected it to an art form. In the council chamber, courtiers began unconsciously replicating her phrasing, sometimes unintentionally, other times with exaggeration so absurd it drew chuckles. A few went too far. Some attempted to replicate her legendary sartorial style. One noble appeared in a white satin gown. Her shoulders were so heavily powdered they resembled the icing on a cake. Another imitated the queen's signature, towering coiffure, only to jab the eye of the person seated next to her whenever she turned her head. Yet these were all seen as proof of loyalty, not mockery. Everyone understood and spoken. To win royal favor, absurd attire was but a trivial price to pay. Even their laughter had quietly changed. Elizabeth's light chuckle at court jests possessed a unique rhythm. That restrained melody never shook her shoulders. Soon, the council chamber echoed with imitative harmonies. Coarse belly laughs were deemed vulgar, replaced instead by elegant chuckles, proper nods, and the occasional lifting of a fragrant handkerchief. The scene felt unreal. A room full of adults silently transformed into one woman. The glow of individuality was gently tucked away, not out of fear, but out of reverence for the strange theater they built together. To blend into the group, one must be like everyone else. To stand out, one must perfectly mimic her. Thus the assembly became a mirror, each reflection slightly distorted, yet undeniably stemming from the same archetype. The absurd court grew ever quieter, senses sharpened, movements restrained, attire became more flamboyant, voices grew softer, as if all were performing within glass cases, pretending not to sweat, not to age, not to ponder the decay beneath the floorboards or the ache in their knees. The queen taught well. After all, decay should not be acknowledged. It should be concealed by powder, deliberately forgotten. Yet the entire spectacle radiated tragic absurdity. This crowd of powerful nobles wrapped in brocade, spraying musk, tiptoeing through the river of history, all to maintain their person as Zers. Should the scent falter slightly, or posture falter slightly, they risk banishment from court. Perhaps not exile, but quiet oblivion, fading away in the powdered and perfumed shadows of others. This system once worked. The illusion endured. The queen remained the sun. The court swirled around her like a golden, sweet minor-smelling flame. But behind the fragrance and smiles, a silent truth lingered one rose oil could never mask. They all feared losing their status, feared aging, feared being seen for what they truly were. Nothing more than sweat stained, flawed, aging mortals. And this fear drove them to pursue fragrances more than anything else. Despite Queen Elizabeth's splendor and magnificent architecture, one crucial element was conspicuously absent from her lengthy list of priorities: a proper sewage system. This queen, who demanded perfection in her appearance and the court scent, chose to overlook the royal latrines. Pipes, sewers, and underground drainage systems were considered the domain of plumbers and serfs, unworthy of the queen. Frankly, Elizabeth would rather commission another portrait of herself draped in silk than approve a new drainage system for Whitehall, while court painters busied themselves immortalizing her in dazzling white gowns. The corridors beneath her feet quietly fermented, a mixture of urine, feces, kitchen waste, and the occasional dead rat, slowed through aged pipes. Many conduits had long since cracked or collapsed entirely, yet the queen's attention remained fixed above ground. Tapestries, jewels, royal celebrations. These weren't matters of importance. Not the faint yet persistent stench rising from floorboards. Not that the problem went unnoticed. Courtiers occasionally mentioned, in the most discreet terms, the peculiar odors in certain stairwells, or the dampness in the west wing corridors. One visiting ambassador had described the palace as magnificent. Only the air carried a certain earthy scent. But Elizabeth remained more concerned with appearances than with plumbing. She treated the matter as one would a draft. Close the windows and pretend the problem vanishes. Funds were ample. Do not imagine England could not afford a few new pipes. Yet the Queen harbored a different vision for the legacy. In her eyes, the court should radiate light and opulence, not the foul stench of lead pipes and sewers. Thus, all funds flowed into banquets, celebrations, and Italian imported brocades. Meanwhile, the odors beneath the palace crept upward like uninvited guests, slowly climbing the staircases. To her credit, she did attempt to mask the problem in her own way. More herbs, more incense, more pots of dried flowers were carefully placed in corners. Lavender sprigs tied with ribbons hung from curtain rods. Before important audiences, juniper smoke would waft through the corridors. It was like covering wall cracks with larger paintings. You couldn't see the damage, but the stench remained. Certain rooms were particularly bad. The antechamber next to the kitchen was notorious for its sulfur-stinged drafts. On warm days, the outhouse beside the chapel emitted a suffocating odor. Even the most devout priests had to shorten their prayers. Servants began sketching rosemary across the flagstone paths, crushing mint leaves beneath their feet, attempting to mask the stench with fragrance. To little effect. Yet within the grand tapestry of court life, the odors became part of the atmosphere, as natural a backdrop as candle smoke or damp stone walls. Surprisingly, few ever complained. Perhaps it was fear. Or perhaps, like those long accustomed to foul odors, they had simply grown accustomed to it. When everything was steeped in perfume and ceremony, even filth became part of the ritual. Nobles pressed lace handkerchiefs closer to their noses. Servants learned to avoid certain corners. And the Queen, wrapped in clouds of musk and orange blossom, likely cannot smell it at all. The scene borders on poetry. A palace built upon the glittering pomp of ceremony and the silent gurgle of waste. Beneath gilded domes, beneath satin slippers, the palace's dark underbelly churned with reminders of real life. No matter how brightly ironed the coarse cloth, or how thickly dusted the powder, the earth had its own way of revealing itself. Elizabeth's refusal to address the matter was entirely understandable, yet profoundly revealing. After all, this had never been merely a question of comfort. It was a matter of image. Repairing Surrey's would earn her no praise. No, for an envoy would write letters extolling the new drainage system. But a magnificent portrait, its collar encrusted with 39 six-hand sewn pearls, would be remembered, would endure for posterity. And so the Queen chose beauty over utility, fragrance over sanitation. In her era, this was not uncommon. It was, in fact, expected. Hygiene was a vague and suspect concept. Luxury, however, was a clear sign of power. A fragrant monarch was seen as elegant. A monarch who cleaned filth by hand was considered improper. Ironically, the court Elizabeth built to escape daily grime was founded upon a problem that only worsened. Ultimately, the problem could not be perpetually concealed by paint or perfumed away. The carefully blended scents of oils and herbs within the palace could never fully mask the stench beneath the floorboards. Yet no one dared speak of it aloud, for the Queen would not hear of sewers. She wished only to listen to poetry, to dance in robes so heavy they required 3 attendants to carry them, to immerse herself in the fragrance of roses and cinnamon, never disturbed by reality. In a way, the courtiers were happy to play along, rather than offend the Queen. By hinting she stood literally atop a sewer, they preferred to drown in the scent. Each morning at Elizabeth's court, before any words were spoken or scrolls unroll, a performance unfolded. The Queen's body required layer upon layer of meticulous construction, each layer saturated with fragrance, beginning with foundation. Not the powder lightly dabbed on cheeks before a dressing mirror, but heavy white lead powder, until human skin tone vanished entirely. This pallor was not merely an aesthetic choice. It was a declaration. I have never been touched, nor shall I be touched. I am different. Next came the rouge, that intense, dangerous red, made by mixing mercury with cinnabar, dotted upon cheeks that trembled at times from fever or toothache. Her lips were meticulously outlined, with a color so vivid even flowers dared not imitate it. These were not cosmetics. They were armor, cracks in the skin concealed by lip gloss, dark circles beneath the eyes hidden beneath pearl powder. Even fatigue must be masked with makeup, until an air of nobility emerges. Fragrance then fills the air, never subtle. Musk, amber, clove, orange blossom, violet, and rose intertwine in strange combinations, each note chosen to suppress the scent lurking beneath garments and makeup. Perfume was never gently applied. Instead, it was poured, rubbed in, fanned, finally, sprayed with force, until the entire room was enveloped in an aura of nobility. Then came the changing of garments. The gowns were voluminous and heavy, embroidered with pearls and expectations. Silent attendants fastened each sash. Mindful of their place, they spoke not a word. The corset was laced tight. Stiff cuffs held the sleeves in place. A slight misstep could cut the skin. Finally, a wide veil encircled her head like a halo. It created the illusion that the queen's face and body were separate. She appeared transcendent and sacred. Next came gloves steeped in scented oil. Elizabeth wore them not merely to display elegance. They erected a barrier of isolation, a barrier against skin minus to minus skin contact. The gloves exuded the scent of lavender and musk, a reminder to each person kissing her hand that they were not kissing a mortal, but a symbol. The entire process took for hours. This was not preparation. It was ritual. She was not merely changing clothes. She was transforming into herself. If this sounds exhausting, it truly was. Yet no one dared speak. No one dared ask. Why must this wise woman, whose power dominated the court, wrap herself in lace and powder before receiving ministers? Simply because her image had long transcended reality. When she stepped out of her chambers, the queen was no longer the weary woman with aching feet and mouthful of decaying gums. She was the virgin queen, radiant with majesty, her elaborate robes so intricate she could scarcely walk unaided. In this world, appearance was sacred as law, more sacred than comfort. At certain moments, even more sacred than truth. Cleansing had become ritual. The act of washing itself took second place. The essence lay in creating the illusion of purity. Hands were wiped clean with scented cloth. The face was dried with powder puffs, not rinsed with water. Hair was dusted with powder, not washed. Bathing in water was a medical risk, but to be seen with a dull, greasy complexion, or heaven forbid drenched in sweat, that danger is far greater. Thus the court embraced the logic of the times. As long as you smell sweet, no one asks when you last touched soap. The queen's rituals became the standard. Other women seeking to emulate her power rushed to adopt these same practices. They applied pigment until skin flaked away, perfumed their armpits and behind ears until scent clung to curtains. They wore stiff, voluminous gowns, had to turn sideways to pass through doorways, and they endured it all with smiles, because duty demanded it, not for comfort, not even for cleanliness, but to preserve beauty forever. Today we might scoff at this, mock the absurdity of a woman needing 5 maids to assist with a corset, that garment which would eventually bruise her ribs. But certain elements of this ritual feel eerily familiar. Replace coarse powder puffs and rouge with filters and foundation. The difference is more subtle than we care to admit. The difference is far smaller than we care to admit. The tools have changed. The pressure remains. This may be the most unsettling truth of all. Elizabeth's mornings were not merely about cleanliness. They were about control. In a world that sought to reduce her to a bargaining chip in marriage or a royal puppet, she chose to become a visual spectacle. Her makeup was not vain adornment. It was power. A daily reaffirmation. I may be a woman, but I am your queen. Respect me as such. And so each morning, she stands still, allowing her face to be reshaped. Each morning, she bears the weight of velvet and velvet minus like deceit. Each morning, her scent always precedes her words, drifting down the corridor. Her presence begins with perfume. Her rain curtain drapes brocade, finished with powder and rouge. A masterpiece of illusion. Yet beneath layers of disguise, flesh and blood still exist. Breath still flows. Sweat still falls. Human limitations remain. And these are concealed layer by layer, whispered in private, denied in public. Cleanliness has nothing to do with soap. It's all about performance. Hygiene is not about health. It's the daily theater. Elizabeth steps into the spotlight, painted to perfection, pretending to be a marble statue. The crowd applauds. Once the painted veil sets, the ruffled collar is smoothed. Elizabeth's body no longer belongs to herself. Now it belongs to England. She is no longer a woman, not even a queen in the private sense, but a symbol incarnate, a living monument, clad in silver armor, coated in rosewater, not a single flaw permitted. No sweating, no pain, no aging allowed. She has become chastity, restraint, and divinity personified. Divinity woven into a woman's flesh. But such symbolism exacted a price. Not merely the hours spent each dawn sculpting herself into an icon. Her skin had no right to break out in rashes. Her breath could not betray sickness. Her stomach dared not rumble at inopportune moments. Purity, or the appearance of purity. It concerned more than mere decorum. It touches upon the stability of the nation. For if the virgin queen is deemed unclean, regarded as mortal, the illusion begins to crumble. A stain on her gown spreads like wildfire through court gossip. Yellow teeth or damp armpits may not be treason, but when power rests upon image, the smallest flaw becomes a threat. In this context, impurity is not merely physical, it is symbolic, and symbols must bear no claw marks. Thus she plays her role at a devotion. Perfume is not a preference, it is insurance. Layers upon layers of lavender, amber, and herbal shavings exist not for pleasure. They form a barrier concealing danger, snuffing out any human scent that might reveal the truth. Beneath that crown lies a body no different from any other mortal's. A weary body, a body in pain, one that might even emit a scent God would not mention. The other women at court understood implicitly. What was expected was far more than mere outward splendor. It was the perpetual concealment of reality. Court ladies stuffed their petticoats with sackets and scented wool. They covered blemishes with white lead. They scrubbed their hands with vinegar water. They understood deeply. Cleanliness and being perceived as clean were entirely different matters. And being perceived as clean was the supreme standard. The fragility of this balance defies description. Queen Elizabeth's reign constantly navigated between her subjects' reverence and their suspicion of her independence. She had no husband, no children. Her monarchy was sustained solely by her image and the power it commanded. A queen wielding absolute authority needed more than a scepter. She needed a myth. And myths never sweat. So she polished every inch of her surface. Every public address was a meticulously choreographed performance. Portraits forever froze the mask of youth. Even as her joints stiffened and teeth fell out, her image remained flawless. That snow-minus white face, those rosy cheeks, that waft of perfume always lingering a step ahead. She guarded the story, because the story guarded her throne. The tragedy lies in this. All of it remains so familiar to this day. Even now, women's bodies are still often treated as billboards rather than vessels of life. They are judged by outward appearance rather than inner experience. Must be fragrant, polished, smooth, smiling. Whether in royal courts or modern offices, this expectation has never fully faded. The language may have changed, but the demands remain constant. Elizabeth was not the only one trapped within the shackles of performance, but she performed it most masterfully. Perhaps that is precisely why it endured. While other rulers fell to betrayal or war, Only time could bring her down. Her enemies could not detect her vulnerability, for she never showed weakness. Until life's final moment, she remained flawless. At least behind the scenes, this illusion demanded ceaseless maintenance. Attendants rotated her fragrant gloves. When headache struck, court physicians dabbed scented oils upon her temples. She shunned the sun's glare, fearing cracks in her makeup might reveal her true self. This illusion was no casual endeavor. It was a full-time occupation, but to show any sign of mortality would be too costly. Thus Elizabeth became a body without substance, a shadow without pulse. She used this to remind the court that flesh and blood are burdens. Softness, sweat stains, or blemishes are symbols of lowliness, proof of fragility. In this court where power tilted toward those most skilled at concealing flaws, floral scents were not merely fashion. They became a rule for survival. Thus even bodily functions required disguise. Chairs were disguised as cushioned seats, elegant yet inconspicuous. The bedchamber was perfumed with dried grass, rose vinegar and musk odors. Nothing unpleasant could be associated with the queen. Reality was no different, especially reality. Ultimately, the scent surrounding her transcended mere perfume. It became a signal, a warning, a curtain separating her from the world. She must exude the essence of a queen. For in this era where power tolerated no weakness, where women had to strive twice as hard to be valued, a single trace of body odor couldn't do years of diplomatic achievement. Thus, her subjects might adore her, yet never truly know her. They know the image, the ceremony, the layers of disguise, the legend, and the scent of her gloves, but not the woman behind them. Her body became a battlefield of expectation, beneath the lace, beneath the foundation, beyond the amber and rose petals. The real person sat quietly, imprisoned by silken stories. Elizabeth's ritual of purity had nothing to do with comfort. It was to maintain an untouchable distance. As long as the myth exuded sweet fragrance, the kingdom could remain safe. Compared to Tudor England, Elizabeth was a saint of purity. While courtiers massed must innis with musk, and London streets reeked of filth and decay, the queen practiced her unique purity. Though free of soap and bathtubs, she pioneered an era of innovation with rosewater and vinegar. She demanded meticulous bedding, changing her undergarments regularly, a small luxury only the wealthy could afford. Her handkerchiefs were perfumed and embroidered. She wiped her face and hands with cloths soaked in rosewater or herbal vinegar, not to remove grime, but to invigorate her skin. More importantly, to erect a fragrant barrier between herself and the mundane world. The court naturally regarded this as an elegant practice. No one expected the queen to scrub her body with hot water, nor would she scrub her feet in a wooden basin. Such actions were for commoners. She relied instead on scented gloves. Each pair, changed frequently, was steeped in the fragrance of lavender or cloves. Her face never bore the grime of the day. It was perpetually covered in layers of white powder and pearl dust. The powder kept her dry, and it preserved her nobility. Yet the powder also clogged every pore. At that time, immersive bathing was considered dangerous. Doctors warned that warm water would open pores, allowing germs to invade the body. This notion, absurd by today's standards, was once widely held. Elizabeth thus refused bathing, not out of aversion to cleanliness, but to preserve her life. Occasionally, however, she would undergo what was called a sweat bath, a therapy combining herbs, towels, and steam, aimed at expelling illness rather than washing away grime. Consider it a royal sauna requiring no rinsing. She favored vinegar for its practicality and fragrance. Vinegar infused with rose petals or thyme was used for every occasion. To wipe her face, clean her hands, sanitize chamber pots, even to gently dab her temples during headaches. That scent cut through the court's pervasive stench. Its sharpness created an illusion of purity. She carried a blend of vinegar and roses. It oddly suited her status. Indeed, by Queen Elizabeth's standards, this counted as clean, especially when you knew most people's hygiene back then, or lack thereof. Country folk slept with livestock to ward off the cold. Clothes wore stiff. Garments grew stiff and hard. Hands seldom touched water. The stench of onions and beer in their diet made their breath pungent. Soap was a coarse home-made product, used more for laundry than skin cleansing. Bathing occurred only in specific seasons, not daily. Many even believed water itself caused disease. Against this backdrop, the Queen's perfumed gloves and rose vinegar became the royal standard of hygiene. However, we shouldn't exaggerate too much. Cleanliness is a relative concept. Queen Elizabeth's wigs weren't ever washed. Her corset was never removed. Heavy ceremonial gowns were only brushed, never washed. Her lead-white face powder quietly poisoned her body for decades. But the crux lay not in actual hygiene. Rather, it was the cultivation of an appearance of cleanliness. An illusion. While the common folk lived daily amidst filth, sweat, and death, she perpetually exuded a diluted scent of paradise. People inevitably romanticized this phenomenon. They imagined her as a pioneering woman ahead of her time. Yet her hygiene practices were not a declaration of rebellion. While certainly a means of warding off disease, their more vital function was to evade worldly judgment. A queen without a husband had to transcend mere standards of decency. She had to be flawless, sacrosanct, no lingering scent, no trace of impurity, no hint of vulnerability, only the faint fragrance of silk powder in crushed violets. Should she falter in her vigilance, rumors would stir. Should she carry the scent of street dust or mortal flesh, whispers would follow. But when musk and civet lingered in the air, the masses proclaim her sacred. She transforms her body into an altar. Let fragrance become her sermon. Compared to Europe's mud-splattered, blood-stained monarchs, she seems to float upon the clouds. Even hostile for an envoy's noble rivals marvel at the aura surrounding her. They may not endorse her policies, yet they always sensed her presence. Her scent arrived before she did, clinging to tapestries, lingering between chair backs. The Queen's fragrance became a political reality. To command respect, Elizabeth must maintain untouchable sanctity, and a holy woman admits no impurity. This held a dark irony. A woman who refused marriage for life, yet forced to groom herself like a bride on permanent display. Each morning, she prepared her body for inspection. Each night, she shed layers of protective disguise. In between, she ruled an empire. Her entire being exuded the scent of bouquets steeped in vinegar and prayer. Yes, Elizabeth is indeed pure. So pure it draws attention. So pure it leaves an indelible mark. So pure she survives in a world that expects no purity from women, especially women in power. But do not confuse this purity with comfort. Do not mistake the scent of lavender for tranquility. Her purity stemmed from pressure, built upon fear. No room for sweat, breathlessness, or error. This, perhaps, was her allure, to remain pure in the filthiest of times, not because she cherished purity, but because survival demanded it. The crown did not merely rest upon her head. It pressed down upon every inch of her skin. So she bathed in perfume, powdered over her bones. What she revealed each day was not a woman's true self, but a miracle wrapped in silk. Tomorrow, like yesterday and all the days before, she would wake once more, to repeat this ritual. For miracles, even fragrant miracles, require careful tending. Centuries have passed since Elizabeth last dusted her powder or dabbed rosewater behind her ears. Yet her hygiene habits, or rather, her lack thereof, refuse to rest with her. Today she lives not only in textbooks and marble statues, but thrives in TikTok videos, podcasts, and late-night comedy shows. The world dissects her bathing habits with morbid fascination and awkward laughter, as if the entire modern world cannot believe that someone wielding such power could be so filthy. It is a peculiar kind of fame, neither the glory of a warrior, nor the reverence of a saint. It borders more on a historical meme. She ruled an empire yet refused to bathe. The joke lies in its absurdity, yet undeniably captivating. while most carry hand sanitizer and criticize celebrities for not using deodorant. The Queen completely avoids the notion of clean water. It is both horrifying and thrilling. This contradiction holds a deadly allure. The supreme authority who commands armies, colonies, and the court. How could she view bathing as a trap to be avoided? Beneath wigs untouched for years, how could such a sharp mind reside? This paradox hits you like cheap perfume, both shocking and inexplicably captivating. This sacred, untouchable virgin queen left traces of musk and sweat. It's pure gold for comedy, perfect podcast material, a history that reeks of raw authenticity. Yet beneath the mockery lies deeper revelation. The world's obsession with her hygiene exposes modern humanity's deep minus-seated fixation, the craving to strip power from its human form, peeling away layer after layer of the fragrant crown, to touch the flesh beneath. This isn't about scent, it's about vulnerability. If even a monarch cannot stay fresh, perhaps our gym bags can smell a little off too. If she could rule wrapped in powder and musk, we could surely endure a day without dry shampoo. Yet laughter always carries an ease. We point and whisper, yet our hearts tremble. Elizabeth's ceremonial pomp exudes suffocating oppression. Beneath lace and lavender scents lies a stifling weight. Modern audiences see not only a queen of unparalleled power, but a woman trapped inside a perfume bottle, pressed between the pages of myth. Perhaps the reason we recognize the scent of performance so clearly is because we are still performing. Are we not? We still powder our bodies, scrub our floors, carefully package ourselves for the world. We may have running water and foaming soap, but the pressure to stay polished never fades. We still dread being seen as untidy, imperfect. Worst of all, to be seen as authentic. Elizabeth avoided bathing for fear of disease. We bathe to escape judgment, but it's just another plague. So when we mock her perfumed gloves and vinegar mouthwash, we secretly envy the clarity in her rituals. She understood the world's expectations of her. Must smell like roses, look like marble, never sweat. This rulebook, though twisted, at least held its own logic. Now we chase authenticity, yet still filter our images. We shout self-scare, but buy products to fix what isn't broken. Perhaps Elizabeth's world was not so different after all, only lacking modern plumbing. Truth be told, we relish scandalous gossip, especially when it's safe and belongs to history. Mocking the late Queen's hygiene habits comes easily. She cannot retaliate, cannot sue. She can only sit still in her portrait, painted with noble dignity, allowing us to dissect her ims across 5 centuries. This is merely voyeurism cloaked in academia, gossip prepackaged as education. Yet whenever we invoke her in YouTube, in lectures, or during awkward first dates with history majors, we awaken far more than stereotypes. We perpetuate the tension between power and humanity, myth and flesh, crown and scalp. Such remembrance serves as a reminder to the world. Greatness does not necessarily come with purity. This thought is strangely comforting. During Elizabeth's reign, there was no modern dentistry, no shampoo, no soap as we know it. She stood at the center of the world's mightiest empire, her wig soaked in the sweat of governance. Yet she endured. She inspired the world. She struck fear into hearts. She carried the scent of musk in her garments. Yet her name echoes in every corner of history. Perhaps the reason we cannot stop talking about her is not merely because she reeked, but because she reeked and yet achieved greatness. She proved women need not be perfect to wield power. She only needed to remain constant. Fragrance could be expected. Her bearing never wavered. Mythical life flawless, even if it meant skipping baths. Of course, internet memes never cease. History repeats endlessly. Lead-white makeup and chamber pot jokes abound. Yet amidst the laughter, a peculiar reverence lingers, not for her cleanliness, but for her discipline, a devotion to illusion, the skill of turning rosewater into armor, forging silence into authority. Perhaps centuries from now, someone will look back on our present rituals. Endless skincare routines, filtered selfies, scented candles. They too will laugh. They will marvel at what we did to appear clean, perfect, in control. They will wonder how we bore such pressure, and question whether we ever truly rested beneath the performance. But in this moment, Elizabeth remains history's most fragrant paradox, revered and ridiculed, admired and despised. This queen who turned purity into legend, even if the truth carries a faint musty scent. When it all ends, what remains is not only Elizabeth's legend, but her scent. Her world was steeped in this rich fragrance. Every corridor, every gown, every gesture carried traces of musk, herbs, and rosewater. It masked far more than bodily odors. It masked a way of life, a world without clean water, without sewers, ignorant of bacteria and hygiene. In such a world, foul odors were not a flaw of character. They were the background noise of existence, and the queen knew how to turn it into a symphony. No showers, no bleach, no hand soap on marble sinks. Instead, there were basins filled with vinegar, gloves wrapped in crushed petals, wigs stuffed with lavender sackets, and cloaks hung to dry by the window, until morning dew feigned completion of the cleansing. But the cleanliness we understand never truly occurred here. The concept of stripping grime from skin with water and foam was almost laughable. Water was dangerous. People feared it, especially warm water. They say it opens pores, inviting germs. So they don't truly wash. They conceal. They maintain a surface cleanliness. And Elizabeth, she is the star of this performance. She layers scents like modern royalty layers PR statements. Cloves faintly linger on her gloves. Roses adorn the hollows behind her ears. Beneath layers of fabric never touched by a washboard lurks a more potent musk. This is no act of subtlety. But subtlety was never the point. Survival is her courtly law. Fragrance is the seal of her identity. It trails behind her like royal procession. People marvel at its sweetness, yet none admit gratitude that it masks the truth. The truth is, beneath the velvet, pearls, and powdered cheeks, the queen was but mortal, sweating unfeeling pain like any other, sometimes even exuding the scent of flesh and blood. But she understood her calling. A queen should not be flesh and blood. She must be the embodiment of an idea. And ideas, they, of course, do not sweat. Naturally, Elizabeth did not create this system. She was merely its inheritor. What she did was perfect it. She elevated the era's olfactory expectations into an art form. Each scented glove, each perfumed handkerchief, each corset stuffed with herbs, became her daily armor, and the stench of the court. That's our cocktail of trampled reeds, candle grease, and body odor, was an enemy she could combat without drawing her sword. She could not control the sewer system, or rather, no sewer system existed. She could not eradicate the filthy river that occasionally meandered beside the royal chambers, but she could control how others perceived her body. She could erect a wall of scent, so thick it felt impenetrable. Of course, not to ward off disease. Disease would come eventually, but to block scrutinizing eyes, to ward off that fear, that if someone came too close, they would discover she was merely a mortal woman, not a queen, much less a virgin. That was the absurdity. This charade had lasted decades. Ministers, ambassadors, poets, lovers, all believed it to be true, or at least remained silent in awe. They marveled at her image, her youth, her vitality. Even as her teeth blackened and her bones ached, the stench of decay was real. But the obsession with illusion was equally real. She painted over the pain, contemplating death's edge, and history itself thanked her for it. If this all sounds dramatic, it's because it was drama. The court was the stage. Elizabeth was the star. Each day a performance erasing fragility. What was erased was not her individuality, but her fragility. She concealed flaws, exhaustion, and decay with foundation and perfume. The court played along, not because they were deceived, but because they craved this illusion as much as she did. The fragile court survived, on the illusion that the queen would never emit an odor, never fall ill, never die. Today, as we look back, We are both horrified and fascinated. We dissect her cosmetics, study her dental problems, and shake our heads at the lack of plumbing. Yet deep down, we secretly envy her. Not the filth or the suffering, of course, but the power of that illusion. The power to forge an existence beyond life itself. She not only achieved the throne, but forged a symbolic legacy that transcended the putrid shackles of her era. For by modern standards, that age was utterly filthy. Streets worse S-balls, food rotted swiftly, rats outnumbered chairs, soot choked the air, rivers resembled sewers. Everyone reeked, everyone knew it, yet none could change it. So humanity did what it does best, adapt. They imbued the stench with meaning. Women scented with rosemary word and refined, men reeking of leather and sweat work old rugged, and the monarch, enveloped in incense and citrus, was revered as divine. This may be the key to understand Elizabeth's legacy. She did not deny the stench's existence. Instead, she transcended it, transforming it into metaphor. Thus, she left behind not merely a throne, but a blueprint for ruling a filthy world, not through cleansing, but through casting spells, not by wiping away, but by shifting focus. Even after her passing, the fragrance lingered, the legend endures. Centuries later, we still depict her as a rose-cheek saint illuminated by candlelight, entirely untouched by dust. As for her true body, that part was deliberately omitted. The scent of truth proved too pungent. So when we remember her, do not purify history. Remember fragrance and play, perfume and contagion. Remember power has always depended on appearances. Sometimes merely being slightly more fragrant than the crowd is enough to dominate the entire scene. Rest now. Let history's scent settle. You have wandered all night in this hall of whitewash and fragrant deceit. It is time to close your eyes. Depart this court of rose-scented masks. The queen sleeps. You too should rest. Good night, traveler. May your dreams be pure, even if history is not.